Okay, so as everyone starts coming back into the room, we'll get started again when Father Josiah is present. But I wanted to thank everyone again for participating and welcome you all again for this event. I hope you've found it spiritually edifying and enjoyable, this first morning session. We've had a lot of great questions from the audience here present and from our webinar attendees. And just a couple of housekeeping things which I'd like to bring to our attention. So first, we've had some childcare. Those who had their children in childcare, if you'd like to make a donation, that'd be great. It would help our two babysitters, Anastasia and Macy, who are taking care of our children while we're able to attend to the lectures. Also, a special thank you to our hospitality team, which has delivered such a wonderful meal. I hope everyone enjoyed the luncheon. So thank you. Next, Father Josiah, as I mentioned, so he's the founder of Patristic Nectar Publications, and it is such a wonderful, wonderful resource. They're currently undergoing a major web site overhaul. I don't know when it's going to be delivered, but Father, it should be. Do you know when the new website will be up?
It's not just a website overhaul.
Okay, it's going to be
the creation of a fully integrated mobile app.
Okay.
And it's going to cost $85,000.
Okay.
We've raised 25. So as soon as some of your generous parishioners send me a check for $60,000, it's going to come online.
All right. So it's coming. So we have a goal to be shot for. But towards that aim, Patristic Nectar Publications is going to be for the first time ever, is offering a special offer for us, for the participants at this retreat. Father Josiah has graciously allowed us to present his entire library, all of his audio series, all of his works. They're 28 lecture series comprising of 177 lectures, 1 hour each, which would cost around over $400, but he's going to offer it to us for $149. So you can have all the lecture series. I have a flyer here that presents them all, and it's on my desk, so you can come at the break and see it. But it goes from the Good Husband, Good Wife series will be there, Contemporary Orthodox Elders, Orthodox Catechism, the Desert Fathers, Biblical Study on Daniel, the Apocalypse, Job, Vespers, of the Prayer Rule, Bible in the Church, Confession, Doctrines about Demons. So you name it. It's seminary in an audio box. So it's available to us, and if to purchase, it's just a link there to patristicnectar.org/Tempe. And it'll be available for, I believe, 3 or 5 days. So it's just a limited time offer for our group. So thank you very much for making that available to us, Father Josiah. And then the other housekeeping, I believe that's all for now, unless there's any other questions. And if not, we'll invite Father Josiah back to conclude now with, or to continue, and now go into the Good Wife. So this second half will be for the Good Wife.
In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. Amen. Before I launch out into the Good Wife, I want to follow up, Father Andre, about what you were just saying about the Patristic Nectar Publications, if I can. The best part of Patristic Nectar Publications are not my lectures, actually. The best part are the lectures of the other teachers that I have on there. One of the goals that we have in this ministry is to collect really high-level quality content by priests who are scholars on the Church Fathers. So I don't know how many of you know the names Father Maximus Constant. You know Father Maximus, who's a superb patrologist. He's the senior research scholar at Holy Cross and Seminaries. Was a Harvard professor. before he was called to the monastic life and went to Mount Athos and became a monk. His lecture series, we just published a new lecture series on the priesthood from him. There are 4 or 5 of his lecture series now that we have. More coming, thank God. A really fine patristic scholar, Father Irenee Steenberg, who is now, as of almost 2 weeks ago, Bishop Irenee Steenberg. He was just consecrated to be bishop. I actually went to his consecration Sunday before last in San Francisco with the Russians, who just about killed me, 6 hours. And I told the Archbishop after, I said, you know, you Russians are intense. I said, I know that you have those services because in Russia outside it's probably 20 below and you want to stay in the church. And so your services are 6 hours long, and he laughed at me. But the beautiful, beautiful teaching from Bishop Irenee, who was not just a disciple of Metropolitan Kallistos Ware in Oxford, but was himself an Oxford Don and was the head of the Department of Theology at the University of Leeds in the UK before he came back to America to serve the church here pastorally. So his series are on PNP. Archimandrite Zacharias from the monastery of St. John the Baptist in Essex, Elder Sophroni's monastery. Father Zacharias is the spiritual son of Elder Sophrony and one of the spiritual fathers at the monastery in Essex. Absolute top-notch teacher of patristics and really a voice for the legacy of St. Silouan the Athonite and Elder Sophrony in the modern world. These are the teachers that are on there. I'm embarrassed to be associated with them. My stuff's only on there because I'm the one who created the thing, but it's being floated by the much more substantial lectures that come from these men. If you haven't heard them, then do your soul a big favor. Do your soul a big favor and listen to them. Okay, this is the hardest time in any seminar, just after lunch. All those nice noodles are growing in your stomach right now. The blood is rushing from your head to your stomach, and you are going to be tempted to fall asleep. I am going to be tempted to fall asleep, but I will not do that. I will not do that, and I want you not to as well, because my self-image will be seriously damaged. Seriously damaged if you start sleeping on me. I am reminded of a story from the very famous founder of Methodism in the United States, John Wesley. This is the middle of the 18th century, the so-called First Great Awakening in America. He was an outdoor preacher. He had a voice that could hold captive 10,000 people outside with no mics. Can you imagine? Can you imagine? One time when he was preaching, a man fell asleep very close to where he was in the front. And Pastor Wesley was deeply offended. So he stopped speaking, and everyone went quiet. And he walked right up to the man, about a foot away from him, and he stamped his foot on the ground and clapped his hands very loud and screamed, "The voice of the archangel and the trumpet of God." The man thought the second coming was happening. And he woke up. I'm sure he never fell asleep again. So I'm not guaranteeing that something like that won't happen to you. If in fact you fall asleep. Although it's much better as a speaker, not to threaten, but just to speak well, to keep you awake. That's what I'm going to try to do. We are letting the men off the hook. We are letting the men off the hook, and we are turning our attention to the ladies. So I want to say to the men what I said to the ladies at the beginning. No bad looks, no elbows, no pokes, no pokes. Mutual encouragement's what's going on here. Mutual encouragement as I speak about the role of the wife. I have 5 typical lectures that I do on this. And like I did with the men, I'm going to focus on one and then do some portions of the other. The first lecture, and the one that I'll focus on, is the good wife as the helpmate. As the helpmate. The second lecture is the good wife as the home worker, or the homemaker, as the domestic diva. The third is the good wife as the lover and the healing drug. I think the men want me to do that one. The fourth is the good wife as the heart of the family. The husband may be the head, but the wife is the heart. And then the fifth lecture is the good wife as the faithful friend. So keep those in mind, and if when I'm done with my first lecture you want me to get into some of the details of those, you'll know some of the themes that you can ask me to expand upon. When the Lord fashioned the earth, remember that he did it in 6 days. The whole world in the 6 days. He came to the point of his final and great masterpiece, and the final and great masterpiece, the capstone of all creation, was the human being. From the dust of the earth, he made a man, Adam, in his own image and his own likeness. Adam was the one and only human being on the earth. He lived in paradise with all the animals and all the creatures, with the earth, the sky, and the waters. He exercised incredible intelligence. Adam was not what we are now. At that time, he was not a sinner. He was not burdened by any necessities or internal needs. He lived at peace with the creation. There were no wild animals. All the animals were in submission to him. He could do what later prophets would do, like Joshua, the spiritual son of Moses, who prayed and stopped the sun for 24 hours where it was. Or the prophet Elias, who prayed and shut the heavens for 3.5 years. And then prayed again, and the rain came. Can you imagine the elements at the command of their head, how it was meant to be? That's how Adam was living. And in the midst of this utter unspeakable goodness, the Lord spoke. He declared that something was, in fact, shockingly not good. He had said everything was good after each day's creation. He looked and he said it was good. He looked and he said it was good, over and over until this moment. Having created Adam, the Lord spoke and said something was not good. Quote, "It was not good for man to be alone. I will make him a helper suitable or fit for him." No helper until then was suitable for Adam from all the animals of the earth. A dog is not man's best friend. Sorry to violate that fundamental principle for you. He can be the best friend after the best friend, but not man's best friend. The wife, the woman, is meant to be man's best friend. All the animals served Adam, cooperating with him, helping him tend the garden, helping him serve the Almighty. But they didn't serve Adam in what in God's mind was a suitable way, in a corresponding way, in an equal glory way, for the reason that he yet did not have another human being to be with. And the Lord solved that need. He changed that which was not good into what he called very good. He caused a deep sleep. He put a divine anesthesia into Adam. And Adam slept, and God took one of his ribs, and he closed up the flesh where he took the rib out. From that rib, he fashioned the woman. He brought her to the man. And then the man said, "This is now bone of my bones," literally. "Bone of my bones and flesh of my flesh. She shall be called woman, because she was taken out of man. For this cause, a man shall leave his father and his mother and cleave to his wife, and they shall become one flesh." Genesis 2, verses 21 to 24. That is how fundamental the union of man and woman is. That is how deep, ancient, and original marriage is. Here is the creation of the primordial man and woman according to our most fundamental sacred text, Genesis, which means origins. Man first from the earth, woman second from the rib. And here we see the realities of marriage and the relationship of man and woman in marriage expressed. We see the primacy of man. He was created first and woman was created second. Man was not created for woman. Woman was created for man. Woman was not created as man's vocation, for man had already received his vocation to be fruitful and multiply, fill the earth and rule it. Woman was created to be the one and unique helper in man's vocation. She is the helpmate. And this primacy of man in creation is something that St. Paul appeals to several times in his letters. For instance, he writes in 1 Corinthians, "Man is the head of woman, and God is the head of Christ. Man does not originate from woman, but woman from man. For indeed, man was not created for the woman's sake, but woman was created for the man's sake. It's 1 Corinthians 11:3, and then verses 8 and 9. Man and woman are mutually dependent in that all men come from women. Neither is independent of the other, yet there is a mutual dependence and a hierarchy or order or primacy in origins. And this order in creation provides an order for interaction between the sexes in chronological time. So, for instance, Paul writes in his first letter to Timothy, I do not allow a woman to exercise authority over or teach a man, but to remain quiet, for it was Adam who was first created, and then Eve. 1 Timothy 2, verses 12 and 13. This creational order is what lies behind the fact that in marriage, the husband is the head of the family. He shows his headship in courtship by taking the initiative to leave his father and mother and to cleave to his wife. By the way, that leaving and cleaving is a major alteration in relationships between parents and children. And this time, the young man asserting his independence to leave his family and to cleave. The word is actually a word that is used, the same root word for glue. When he cleaves to his wife, it's as though he's adhered to her with a fantastic super glue. He leaves and he cleaves. He takes the initiative in conjugal union by joining himself to the woman to become one flesh with her. He exercises his headship in marriage by being a leader. The corresponding reality for the woman, who Paul says is the glory of man, is to be the one and only unique helpmate of the man, one to register and receive his pursuits, to be his final earthly destination. It's a fantastic image. The wife is her husband's final earthly destination. After he has left his parents, she's the one to receive the august embraces of the union, to be a partner with, enable, and facilitate man in his vocation, so that the new reality is, in God's words, very good. It went from not good to very good. Notice also that the woman is the only helper of man in this text. Adam has the help of the animals. He has the help of the plants. All creation was at Adam's beck and call. All paid obeisance to him as an earthly king. Yet despite this wonder of innumerable non-human helpers, Adam's condition was pronounced by God not good. Adam's great need could not be supplied by anything in creation, nor by non-human species, as much as these sub-helpers were a delight and a blessing to him. Adam's need could only be supplied by Eve. Only one was his complement. Only one was his completion. Only one was his adequate helpmate. Only one who could change his condition from not good to good. I was reading very recently a fascinating article. It was in the Wall Street Journal about the rat race, basically, that dictates the lives of those who live there. So this man, in order to escape the rat race, bought an island and had been living on it with his dog for many years. To escape the rat race, he took his dog to an island. And as much help and company as that dog might provide, it ended not good. Man is not meant to live with his dog on an island, even though that can be very attracting in some conditions. One of the great sorrows of our post-Christian culture is that our marriages have dissolved and divorcees are turning to pets. The pet industry has become a multi-billion, $48 billion annual industry for pets. We have pet cemeteries. We have pet clothes. We have fancy meals for pets. We have insurance plans for pets. And it's pretty easy to have a pet because pets generally don't have human passions. Pets generally don't stab you in the back. Pets generally don't talk back to you. They don't call upon us to forgive much. They don't call upon us to repent much. They don't call upon us to listen much. Animals are no substitutes, dear ones, for human beings. A dog cannot replace a wife. There's only one suitable helper, and that is woman. Saint Tikhon, the great patriarch of Moscow, says this. He says about the uniqueness of woman. He says, without a helpmate, the very bliss of paradise was not perfect for Adam. Can you imagine? There was no sin yet, and still it was imperfect because the woman was not there. Endowed with the gift of thought, speech, and love, the first man seeks with his thought another thinking being. His speech sounds lonely, and the dead echo alone answers him. His heart full of love seeks another heart that would be close and equal to him. All his being longs for another being analogous to him, but there is none. Then the bountiful God, anxious for the happiness of man, satisfies his wants and creates a mate for him, a wife. But if a mate was necessary for man in paradise, in the region of bliss, the mate became much more necessary for him after the fall in this vale of tears and sorrows. What a beautiful word from Saint Tikhon. We have, in the 3rd century, one of the most beautiful patristic descriptions of the first marriage. It's given by a church father named Saint Methodius of Olympus. He describes God himself as the priest that performed the first marriage. These are his words. He says, the ecstatic sleep into which God put the first man was a type of man's enchantment in love. When in his thirst for children, he falls into a trance, lulled to sleep by the pleasures of procreation, in order that a new person might be formed in turn from the material that is drawn from his flesh and bones. For man made one with woman in the embrace of love is overcome by a desire for children and completely forgets everything else. What an incredible statement. St. Methodius is saying that God has worked this mystery of love himself. He played the role of priest in the first marriage, and he threw into Adam's life this mysterious sleep, which he says was a picture of what would be described as the enchantment of love that brings a man and woman together. That is that experience of finding your spouse, of being out of yourself, of being in an altered state, is what is depicted in the deep sleep, St. Methodius says, that God put Adam into originally. The fact that God himself brought Eve to Adam is part of the marital mystery, because God gives away the bride to her bridegroom, so to speak. Fathers will fulfill that in future days when they bring their daughters and give their daughters to their future husbands. The deep attraction between a man and a woman sustained after the fall is the fruit of the fact that God made Eve out of the flesh of Adam and then united them in Edenic marriage. After the fall, man and woman would find themselves isolated and divided. They would struggle to regain their original one flesh union in a fallen way through sexual intercourse. The foundation and the reason for the mysterious attraction between man and woman is found, though, in this original one flesh creation of Adam and Eve. Man and woman were meant to be one flesh. They desired to live as such, and that desire is good in paradise itself. Note how God made the woman. He could have very easily made the woman from Adam's big toe. He could have. He could have taken that toe, fashioned the woman, but it would not have conveyed the truth because she wasn't made to be walked upon. No, he chose to make her from his rib as his companion and equal and the guardian of his heart. What an image. What an image. Why God chose that in his wisdom. What exactly does it mean to be a helpmate? What does it mean to be a helpmate? The word helpmate in Genesis 2:18, voithon katafton, a helpmate to him, someone who is unique. She's the helper. This word is applied to God numerous times in Scripture. David calls God his voithos, his helper. In fact, we have in Byzantine iconography, we often see cryptograms where the word for the Mother of God is placed, Theotoke, and then we see the word voithi, in the imperative, help me. It's a cry to the Mother of God. Theotokos, help me. In fact, I have those embroidered on my arms. Theotoke, there's the Byzantine cryptogram for the Mother of God, and the Byzantine cryptogram for help me. I have that painted in the windowsills of my altar, and it helps when you're trying to pray. It's a big encouragement to remember who's going to help you when you call out to her. This help is the kind of help that Eve brought to Adam. He was the one extending his hands to God. He looked in vain amongst the animals for someone to be with him. He loved them all, but none of them were suitable helpers. He cried out, and God gave to him the helpmate, the voithon. The helpmate wife follows the husband as her leader. She responds to him as her head. Just as I emphasized the husband's role as being a leader, that's what I really focused on. Now I want to help you ladies understand, what does it mean? How is it your dignity to have a leader in your house? What does that mean to follow your husband and to let him, to adorn him as a leader? Well, one point it means is that the wife who knows her position, the calling that she has received, should refuse to act herself as the head of her family. Our Lord established a clear relationship between spouses and a soul-nourishing domestic polity. The well-ordered Christian home begins in a proper relationship between the husband and the wife. St. John Chrysostom says these words. He says, "There is nothing which so welds our life together as the love of a man and his wife." Nothing so gives substance, welds our life, gives us stability in the midst of this crazy world as the love between a husband and a wife. So to know your place, to facilitate that love instead of conflict, by having two heads who are always smashing each other, insisting on their way, to know your role, for a husband to express his headship with sacrifice, and for a wife to express her calling as a helpmate by receiving, strengthening, completing her husband's leadership. This brings stability to a home. The Christian house is not a democracy. Rather, the Christian home is a benevolent monarchy, established with a detailed governing order. St. John Chrysostom writes this. He says, "In order that the one might be subject and the other rule, for equality often it brings strife. He suffered the family to not be a democracy, but a monarchy. As in an army, this order one may see in every family. In the rank of the monarch, there is the husband. In the rank of the lieutenant general, the wife. And the children also are allotted a third station in command. And after these, a fourth, if you have servants. For these also bear rule over their inferiors, and some one of them is often set over the whole, keeping a post as the master, but still as a servant. And together with this, another command, and among the children themselves, another, according to their age and their sex. And everywhere God has made governments at small distances and thick together, that all might abide in concord and in much good order." Here's his vision. Here's St. John Chrysostom's vision for the order of a house. There's the head, who he describes here in polity terms as the benevolent monarch. Then there is his right hand, who is the lieutenant general, that's the wife. And then there are the children, and even the children share in the authority of their parents according to their age, so that they're lined up. This works a lot in my house. This works a lot. The children vie, of course. They vie with each other all the time. And I'm constantly working hard to help the older ones respect and teach the younger ones. And I'm constantly trying to work to help the younger ones respect the older ones. I'm also trying to teach my sons to have particular care for my daughters. And I'm trying to teach the daughters to have particular respect for their brothers. Very challenging task all the time. One of the ways that I affect it is when we eat dinner together. And first of all, do you know what eating dinner together means? That means that your wife serves the food and you sit at a table, you look at each other, you have dinner. You know what that is? Lots of folks don't even know what that means anymore. Eating dinner together, very smart thing to do as a family, to have a dinner table. Even if you can't be at it all the time, it has a central place. And at that table, there's order. at that table. My wife is always sitting with me on my right. If I'm not there, she sits in my spot. And then my oldest son sits across from me. And then his next older brother sits to his right. And then his sister. And there's an order there. It's not like they're going to get spanked if they don't sit there. But certainly when the grandparents come over, certainly when we have a formal meal, whatever, they know where their place is. And it really helps them. It helps them to be respectful. Sometimes they get carried away. My oldest son that's living at home now is 15. His 3 older brothers are all out of the house. And so he is, shall I say, spreading his wings as the oldest brother. He thinks the idea is that as the oldest brother, he gets to tell the younger brothers what to do. And if they really mess up, he gets to take care of business. This is what he thinks. This is what he thinks. He's going to show those little guys, one of whom is only 2 years younger than him, and the other 5 years younger than him. He's going to show his way. The other day I confronted him. I said, son, I said, aren't you just going a little overboard with this? You're yelling at your brother sometimes, and you're so much bigger and stronger than him. And he goes, Pops, don't you remember what my older brother did to me? In his mind, he was carrying on the sacred tradition of molesting your younger brothers. Not sure that was a great idea. But there is order. There is order, and there's the respect that comes with it, St. John Chrysostom says. How is it that love can exist in a hierarchy where there is also respect required? St. John answers this. It will exist there, I say, preeminently. For she that fears and respects her husband as being the head and loves him as being a member, since the head itself is a member of the body at large. So here's Chrysostom saying, don't pit leadership and love against each other. Don't pit order and devotion and affection against each other. That they actually mutually help each other. Just think of your own parents. Think about how deeply you respect your own parents and how you would never, even as a grown-up, if you had a problem with your father or you had a problem with your mother, how you would always approach it with deep respect. Just think about that. Even if they are unjust, how you speak to them because of their position, your love for them is actually enhanced by that because it's combined with respect. It should be the same way in the family and between the children. To the husband, God has entrusted the marketplace, St. John says, and to the wife, the management of the house. The man feeds, the woman clothes. The husband works in the politics of the city. The wife assumes the large portion of the household administration. Should she cease to do this, the whole life of the city would come to a screeching halt. Here is the concept that I was mentioning from C.S. Lewis earlier, when C.S. Lewis says that the only job that we can really call a job is motherhood. Every other job is in support of that. The birth of immortal beings and their being raised is the most significant job any human being can do, and all other jobs are in the support of that, which is exactly why, dear ones, the most Mother of God is the greatest that has ever been. It's why she has superiority over Archbishop Benjamin when he's here, and he bows to her. It's why we priests bow to her. It's also why in the Orthodox Church we don't have a movement of women demanding to be priests. You know why? Because they know better. They know that if you really want to be great, you're not a priest, you're the Mother of God. They know that motherhood, sanctity, love, humility, faith, the qualities of the Mother of God make her supreme, such that even if you go to the masculine place of masculine places, you go to Mount Athos, what you'll see in every single monastery is an icon of the Mother of God standing upon the holy mountain. She's depicted as an abbess. The icon is called the Abbess of Mount Athos. She's standing upon the peninsula, and you see all the monasteries, the 20 monasteries, all the small sketies covering the mountain, and her great big feet, even though she was a tiny woman. A tiny woman. She's standing with her staff upon it all. Why? Because she rules the mountain. She is the leader of the men. This is why all the 12 holy apostles, those who could heal people, raise them from the dead, who spoke the word and caused whole nations to be converted, had the Mother of God at the center of their life. She was the spiritual mother of all the 12 holy apostles. This is why when it came time for her repose, they all by the mercy of God, gathered around her to weep and cry because they didn't know life without her. This is the role that a woman who knows the dignity of what it means to be a wife and a mother has. Should she cease to do this, the whole life of the city would come to a screeching halt, St. John Chrysostom says. Christian spouses should know their callings, how they fit together, in order to work together. No conflict between husband and wife, especially violent conflict, is tolerated by the Lord. Domestic violence is something that is spoken about and censured by all of the great church fathers, one after the other. The husband, Chrysostom says, must never threaten his wife, for he is to love his wife as Christ loves the church, the partner of one's life, the mother of one's children, the foundation of one's every joy. What a description. The partner of one's life, the mother of one's children, the foundation of one's every joy. One ought never to chain down by fear and menaces, but with love and good temper. What sort of union is that, where the wife trembles at her husband? And what sort of pleasure will the husband himself enjoy if he dwells with his wife as with a slave and not with a free woman? Yea, though thou shouldst suffer anything on her account, do not upbraid her, for neither did Christ do this. St. John Chrysostom in his homily 20 on Ephesians. It's living in the light of the cross of Christ and devotion to bearing the cross that regulate the hierarchical relationships in the family. Remember, leadership is defined in Christ's definition, which is not the world's. He says the Gentiles exercise lordship over each other. They love to rule people. They love to look down upon people. It is not so among you, but the greatest among you will be everyone's slave. That's how the cross regulates harmony and interaction between the husband and the wife. Wives, be subject to your own husbands, as to the Lord. For the husband is the head of the wife, as Christ also is the head of the church, he himself being the Savior of the body. But as the church is subject to Christ, so also the wives ought to be to their husbands in everything. This takes lots of courage of heart for women. It takes a true manifestation of feminine power. Listen to St. Peter. This is an incredible text. You wives, be submissive to your own husbands, so that if any of them are disobedient to the word, they may be won without a word by the behavior of their wives, as they observe your chaste and respectful behavior. Wow. Now, of course, if you have a wonderful husband who always is a servant and always is thinking about you, every day he brings you flowers, every day he calls to see how you're doing. I mean, who couldn't obey a man like that, right? But obedience in that case is not worth much, right? If I only obey my bishop when my bishop is super nice and says nice things about me and only tells me to do the stuff I want him to tell me to do, what kind of obedience of a priest is that? Obedience for a priest is shown when the bishop tells him to do something he doesn't want to do, and he still does it with the same zeal and devotion that he would do if it was what he wanted to do. That's obedience. So remember, here's Peter describing the counsel of a wife to be led to obey the leadership of her husband when the husband is bad. He says, look, if your husband is disobedient to the word, what should you do? Get in his face? Let him know what a slob he is? No, that's not what he says. He says, win him by your submissive behavior without a word, so that he can observe your chastity and respectful behavior. You don't even have to speak. As a matter of fact, if a husband's being a poohead, it's better not to speak, right? And it's not just husbands, by the way, it's basically children too. The principle that you can learn from us priests that we're taught by our spiritual fathers, the principle of spiritual fatherhood is you only speak when you discern teachableness. If there is an interest in hearing something, you speak. If you don't think so,
you keep your mouth shut, because why are you going to heap up more burdens on someone who's already burdened, who isn't interested in hearing anymore? It applies all over the place. Teachableness is the prerequisite for instruction. If your husband is not listening, do not teach him. He will make your life worse. Instead, let me give you a suggestion. Husband's being a poohead. You come up to him, and you rub his shoulders. Rub his shoulders. Give him a nice shoulder rub right there. And then you give him a kiss on the cheek and say, hey, sweetie, how you doing? Can I get something for you? And he's like, oh, wow. Yeah. Bring me a beer, honey. Oh, let me get that in a cold glass for you, sweets. Let me get that in a cold glass, right? And then you say to him, after you've rubbed his shoulders, you say, hey, sweetheart, can I tell you something? And he's like, sure, sweetie. What? Then you nail him. Let me just tell you, that 180 degrees different than you being irritated and because your husband's being a flub and you just talk with him like you're his teacher. No man wants to be taught by his wife. I'm sorry. There is no man who wants his wife to become his teacher and tell him what to do. And guaranteed, if you take that approach, all you're going to do is make him not do it longer. It works the same way, by the way, in any authority relationship. Just because I have a bishop doesn't mean I don't want to tell him things sometimes. And it doesn't mean that he's always right. But even when he's wrong, he's still my bishop. Can you imagine a priest going up to his bishop when the bishop's made a bad decision and saying, Your Eminence, what a stupid decision. Can you imagine? It would be a bad day. It would be a very bad day. That's not how we do it. Let me tell you how we do it. We go like this. Your Eminence, may I have your blessing to speak frankly? That's how you do it. And then he'll say either yes or later. If he says later, you just break it to him later. He says yes, you've shown, you're acknowledging proper relationship. You're giving proper respect, and he has now invited you into his world. So now you can say lots of things that you could never have said if you had taken a proud position, as though you were the leader of your bishop, which you're not if you're a priest. That principle, very valuable in any interpersonal relationship in which there is a structure. Especially fruitful in your own house. Especially fruitful in your own house. And if your kids see you do it, then there might be more respect between them and you, right? If they see their mother in the face of their father resisting his leadership because it doesn't measure up to her expectation, do you think that they are going to be respectful to her when she doesn't measure up to theirs? But if they do see her taking effort to respect their dad, then she can also say, sweetheart, have you ever seen me talk to your father like that? And I don't expect you to talk to me like that. And then the husband can step in. Many times, good husbands, if they see their children speaking disrespectful to their mom, the husband will stop in. He'll step in, he'll say, wait a minute. You never speak to your mother that way. None of my children will ever speak to their mother that way in my house. A husband can do that, especially if he knows he has the respect of his wife. He'll want to do that. So St. Peter's advice, besides the universal apostolic calling for wives to obey their husband, he also posits this immense power of wifely obedience. She can win her husband from his disobedience without even speaking. That is how powerful the woman is. The obedience of the wife is so powerful that she's able to win him without any words. This immense power of the wife to bend the husband is a tremendous thing called feminine allurement. It is the gift of God, the church fathers say, to the wife, just as strength is the gift to the husband. And by God endowing both, they bend and they meet together. The husband is enchanted by his wife, can't live without her, and so he bends to her, and his leadership causes her to bend to him, and they can meet in the mutual humble bow. St. Peter continues in that text by calling on wives to put clothing on, unique clothing. He says, adorn yourselves with the true beauty, the imperishable quality of a gentle and quiet spirit, as godly wives have always done. What a text. What a text. Devoted wives should work hard at making their true beauty, not being the things they put in their hair, not being their clothes, but the quality of a quiet spirit. He says these things have adorned godly wives from of old. The helpmate is called to obey and submit to her husband with a gentleness and a quiet spirit. This wifely obedience, this powerful virtue, is tested and demonstrated when the husband tempts the wife by his own arrogance, by his pride and his sometimes tyrannical spirit, sometimes by his irresponsibility, sometimes by his radical incompetence that might even threaten the family. Those are hard times for a wife, really hard times. It's times like this when the good wife manifests her character by refusing to act as her husband's head or as her husband's teacher or his judge. The good wife doesn't fight with her husband or scream at him. She doesn't raise her voice as though she is going to chastise him. To do so is a sure and certain way to set herself back and her cause back. In confession, when I'm trying to help wives deal with difficult husbands and to pass on some good principles, I ask them what it would take for them to scream at me. So really, if you went to your priest, would you, and he was doing something you didn't like, would you just scream at him? Our ladies almost would never do that. They couldn't imagine themselves screaming at their priest. And I say to them, why then would you allow yourself to scream at your husband, who is your head? Only because you really, at that moment, don't think he is. You think he is your hierarchical equal, as though a bishop and a priest are the same, but they're not. We're not talking about value. Equal in value. A bishop is no more valuable to God than a priest. A husband is no more valuable to God than a wife. But there's an order in creation that the Lord expects us to follow. We should not allow ourselves to take the liberties with those that God has set over us without consequence. So then I remind them that they should think the same way about their own husbands that they think about their own bishop or spiritual father or priest. Show the same respect. A wrong husband, a stupid husband, a foolish husband, an incompetent husband, we could add any other adjectives you want, is still a husband and the head of his wife. It's not that the good wife is called to obey and submit to the perfect husband alone. There is no such thing. You want the perfect husband, you're going to be a nun. There's only one worthy of that title. And if you want him, then go become a nun. But if you want to live in this world, you're going to live with a sinner. If you needed a perfect husband, then no wife would ever submit or obey to any husband at all. For a husband to unjustly yell at his wife is a terrible sin. But it is worse for the wife to do it to the husband. For a parent to scream and rage at a son is worse than for a son to scream and rage at a parent. Not because they're any different in value, but because they're different in rank, in order. And respect goes with that. Let the husband be a spaz. Let him act like a fool. Let him act like a fool. Your becoming a fool in response to his foolishness doesn't make you look good, right? No, but if you're quiet, you do what St. Peter says. If you respect him, even when he's unrespectable, wow, you are calling down upon yourself blessings. You're calling down God's special attention. That's the way that you get grace, and you can bring tremendous things to pass. Tremendous things to pass. Because you know that when you suffer is when you pray. When you have pain in heart, your prayers matter. That's when God listens. And you can help your husband, your whole family a lot by allowing that pain to be there. Don't cast it out. Feel bad for him if we're acting like we shouldn't. Don't let our mistakes encourage you to make a mistake. Suffer there. Pray for us. Do what you should, but do it as a wife. If you're going to say something strong, say, sweetie,
can I talk to you frankly? Right? And if he says yes, then tell him. And if not, don't. So this is my encouragement. Wives, as helpmates, should allow themselves to be led. If she is to be able to tame others, especially her children, and to teach them, she must allow herself to be tamed. By her submission to her husband, the good wife becomes a model of the Christian vocation itself and the endeavor of every single believer. This is from St. Macarius of Egypt. He says, before a woman is married, she acts in accordance with her own will and her own desires. But once she's married, she lives under the direction of her husband and she abandons her self-will. Similarly, the soul has its own will and its own laws and activities. But when it becomes worthy of uniting with Christ, the heavenly bridegroom, it submits to his law and is obedient no longer to its own will, but rather to that of Christ. What St. Macarius is saying is that the position of the wife is a model for every Christian, including the husband. If you want your husband to put Christ more in his life and to do Jesus' will instead of his own, the best way to influence him is to do that yourself. Put the will of God above your own will. Respect your husband in a self-denial, a movement of self-denial, and you'll be presenting him a tremendous, beautiful example. The good wife submits to her husband at all times, and this is where her true power and influence lies. This is why it takes so much courage and trust in God. St. Peter continues in that same passage that I've been quoting from in 1 Peter 3, and he says, in this way, in former times, the holy women who hoped in God used to adorn themselves, being submissive to their own husbands. Thus Sarah obeyed Abraham, calling him Lord, and you have become her children if you do what is right and are not frightened by any fear. That last portion is really important, without being afraid of anything. Submitting to your husband, respecting him, even when he's foolish, it's not a scary prospect, he's saying. You bring God onto your side. The holy women of old did this before you. They not only obeyed their husbands, but they called their husbands Lord. Now, we don't use that in our parlance today. But not too long ago, we did. My Lord and my Lady, you know this in the English language. We're an egalitarian society that doesn't believe in kings or hierarchy at all. But old America did. Old England certainly does. That's in our language. If we are going to imitate the women saints, then we become their children by doing what they did. Because obedience is just plumb gorgeous. Obedience is beautiful, which is why we love it so much in Jesus' life. It's why we bow down before it. It's not slavery, it's freedom. It's glorious and it's powerful and it's the most beautiful thing, which is why Jesus has won the world. That's why we're all bowing down to him, not because he ever did anything for himself. Can you think of one thing that the Lord Jesus Christ did for himself? Just one. Jacob.
There were a couple times where he started to do something for himself, like before the feeding of the 5,000, he was about to go off on his own. He saw someone else needed it and he stopped.
And even probably going off on his own meant to go pray and be with his Father. So even that was a pious thing, a beautiful thing. But you're right, even when he was exhausted, after he had already worked numerous miracles, then he gets called upon to do a greater miracle. And then even after feeding the 5,000, he sends his disciples away on a boat, tries to get a little peace, tries to find a little time by himself to pray. And even then, a storm arises and he goes out to greet his disciples and give them another lesson. It's one thing after another. And we don't look at it and say, oh, poor Jesus, he never actualized himself. Oh, poor Jesus, he never asserted himself. He has such a self-esteem problem. We don't look at that. We look at that and we say, wow, what control, what majestic personality to be able to do that. It's exactly the same in our family relations, if we can do the hard things. And this is hard. Remember, the worst master of all is to obey yourself. Tyranny, terrible tyranny. The good wife remembers that
When the husband goes to work and he leaves the home immediately, she also has to assume his place in the house. She becomes his practical helper. She's always trying to enhance him, to strengthen him, to nourish him, to feed him, to add value to his life and to his work, to energize him, to comfort him, to be at his side in important points, to dignify him, to encourage him, to delight him, to cheer him, to sober him too. Our wives can do things to us that nobody else can do, like put us in our place, put us back down on the ground so that our feet can touch the dirt. Oversee his health, clothe him, calm him, ensure his sleep, tame him sexually, be involved and interested in his vocation, help him to find and fulfill his vocation, which changed so much in our current culture. Counsel him like no one else. Listen to him. Call him by beautiful and powerful wifeliness to become a good man. This is how we become better. Our women tame us. Our women pull out of us a desire to become better men, better Christians, better fathers. You know, one of my favorite wife saints is a woman named Margaret, St. Margaret of Scotland. She was born in 1045. She was the granddaughter of the English king. And she wanted to be a nun. But when she was 16, she was going up the North Sea, and they stopped at port near Scotland. And the King of Scotland, who was a wild man, his name is Malcolm III Canmore. He was a warrior, an illiterate warrior, a Viking. He was nuts, absolutely nuts. He saw her and he fell in love with her. And he proposed to her. She wanted to be a nun. This guy's a barbarian. And her grandfather was St. Stephen of Hungary. I mean, she had holiness in her family on both sides. Incredible woman. God appears to her in the night and says, I want you to be his wife. Can you imagine getting that information? I want you to be his wife. She not only said yes, she became his wife. She bore him 8 kids, 6 sons and 2 daughters. 3 of those sons would become successive kings. 2 of them would become abbots and saints. She led a revival. She sparked a revival in the entire nation. And she took her barbarian, crazy husband and turned him into a lamb. Took a wild Viking and made him a civilized, devout Christian whom her spiritual father wrote her life. This is how we know him so much. Father Turgot was an incredible chaplain for the royal family. Wrote her whole life when she passed away. And described seeing the warrior crazy man who had spent his life literally killing people in battles, having tears pour out his face in their chapel, doing orthros, doing matins together in the mornings. This is what she had turned him into. There's stories. She used to insist that before they started the day, the servants would bring in 12 orphans. She would feed them, clothe them, and care for them with her own hands, and her husband. They would serve them breakfast, they would give them new clothes, they would give them a little money, give them some encouragement, etc. Every day. This is how she started every day. She used to constantly give his money away. Give his money away to the church, give his money away to poor people. She built what is now St. Andrews, the city of St. Andrews in the eastern part of Scotland, famous for golf today, but it's famous traditionally. Its name comes from the fact that the bishop of that area in the 9th century wrote to our bishop in Patra, where St. Andrew the Apostle's relics were, got the relics, a big portion of them, and built a magnificent church. She built a cathedral on top of it. It was that cathedral that John Knox in the 16th century, excuse me while I spit, not in here, outside. It was that cathedral that John Knox, the Protestant crazy man, whipped his hearers into a frenzy, and they tore it down to the stones while he was preaching at the outbreak of the Protestant Reformation. All of those centuries, it was the major pilgrimage site for St. Andrew outside of Patra. People came up from England and to that spot in Scotland, and they had to go across the Firth of Forth, right? A big inlet, a waterway. And it was very hard on foot as a pilgrim to do that. So she took her money, her husband's money, and she endowed a port on either side of the firth, and she paid boatmen to take pilgrims across so they wouldn't have to spend the days going around the firth. Today, 2016, if you go there, it's still South Queens Ferry and North Queens Ferry to this day. She used to take so much of his money for good works that he caught her. One time she took his keys to the treasury when he wasn't around, opened the treasury up, took a bunch of gold out, and was walking down, it was in the basement, was walking down the hallway when he showed up. Yeah, bumped into her, and she looked at him, caught, deer in the headlights, and he said, "Sweetheart, you do recognize that I can have you executed for this." And she looked at him, and she pinched his cheek, and she goes, "I know, sweetie." And she walked right by him. She walked right by him. This is called the good wife. This is called the good wife. She became the national patron of Scotland. Andrew is formally St. Andrew. St. Andrew is even their flag. But she is still talked about. At the time of the Protestant Reformation, all the Protestant reformers talked about wanting to reform Margaret tales. Luther was so bothered because everybody was always talking about St. Margaret and her examples of holiness. And of course, she was totally dedicated to monks and priests, which kind of freaked him out. This is the power of the good wife. Look what she could do. She didn't do that by playing king to the king. She did that by being a loving, devoted, respectful, humble wife. And therefore, she could do anything she wanted with him. And she did. She never shamed him. Women can be smarter. They can be more pious. They can be more talented. They can be more able in every way. But none of those things are inconsistent with a wife being a helpmate and honoring her husband and respecting his role as the leader and the head of the house. There's a way to be a good wife who's smarter and more talented than your husband and still honor him. I have spent a lot of my adult life reading the works of St. John Chrysostom, and a lot of his works are when he was a bishop, when he was a priest, preaching in the presence of his bishop. Can you imagine being the bishop of St. John Chrysostom when he was a priest? Oh my gosh. The man would preach for 1 hour, and then when he stopped, the people would boo. They were so upset that he would stop preaching after 1 hour. They didn't want it to stop. And then maybe if he had a little energy left, the man was only about 4'10". He was. But he was the biggest man anywhere. If he had any energy left, he would keep going. Now, can you imagine? He was a priest. He had a bishop in the throne. What would the bishop say after a homily from St. John Chrysostom? Even a talented bishop had no hope, no chance of following up a sermon like that. So what Chrysostom would do is in his sermon, he would find ways to direct all the attention that he had fixed upon him to his bishop. He would be talking and then he would say, well, we've learned this great virtue by watching our esteemed father in Christ do this or that. He would constantly find a way to turn to, he had 2 successive bishops, Methodius and Flavian, and he knew how, as a priest, to do his job, but to respect his head, who was sitting right by him. A wife can do that too in her house. She can be more talented in this or that, no better, so what? You can still honor your husband. You can still respect him. You can still make sure he knows that he's the head of your family by how you deal with him. And being careful never to shame him. I'll say a few more words and then stop and open it to some questions. You know that our culture has been racked since the 60s by an extreme movement. And I would say extreme. When I talk about feminism, I like to only put the word radical because there's a feminism actually that the church supports 100%. Jesus radically altered the life of women and shocked the world. He brought women into his inner circle. He taught them equally with men. When he rose from the dead, he entrusted the announcement of the resurrection to women. He exalted as the head over all in the church a woman, the most pure mother of God. And so our church has been filled for 2,000 years with innumerable women saints. So Jesus absolutely elevated the status of woman. That is a Christian feminism. However, there is a radical or a secular feminism which broke out in the 60s, which says that all the things I'm telling you today are not true. That women and men, in order to be equal, have to do the same thing. And the true measure of a woman is for her to be in the public sphere and to have a paycheck exactly equal to men. And the result of that, and the necessary condition for that argument, of course, is abortion and the degradation of motherhood. You can't think that motherhood is the greatest job in the world and promote a definition of meaning and significance that is in the public sphere alone, and that's measured by money and a paycheck. That's not how it works. That's not how it works. This is radical feminism. And at the heart of radical feminism is this mistake. And that is that equality and function are the same. If you're going to be equal, you have to do the same thing. That is absolutely not true. Why do we say that it's not true? We don't say it's not true because somehow being a husband is better than being a wife. Nonsense. We say it's not true because it's not true in God. Father and his only begotten Son and his all Holy Spirit are absolutely equal. They possess divinity equally, the same mind, the same power, the same will. There is an equality of divinity between the persons of the Holy Trinity. Absolutely. Is there a structure and order? Absolutely there is. The Father is the Father of the Son. In Paul's language, God is the head of Christ, as man is the head of woman. It wasn't the Father who became a man that we celebrate in Christmas in 40 days. It was his Son. And after his Son was crucified and raised and glorified and sat down at his Father's right hand, he sent forth the all-humble Holy Spirit, who brings glory to the Father and the Son and camouflages himself. There is an order in the persons of the Holy Trinity, and there is an equality. And Paul, in his epistles, takes that divine order, the fact that equality and functionality are not the same, and he applies it to the family. He applies it to society. There's no reason to be jealous over your bishop because you are an equal Christian. There's no reason to be jealous over your president because you are an equal citizen. There is no reason to be jealous, wives, over your husband's position in the family because you are an equal person, made in the image of God, just like him. Equality and functionality are different. This is the heresy of feminism. Feminism presupposes unisex reality, and what it ends up doing is eclipsing woman's true power, which is why it's been so absolutely connected to the breakdown of the family and to the lack of freedom, ultimately, for women. What we have today is some benefits from feminism and a lot of very, very wounded women who have bought the line that children are a burden, to be pregnant is to be a slave, and to have kids is creating overpopulation in the world, and a terrible thing to do if you're shepherding or stewarding the earth. Remember that to be a good wife, you have to remember the distinction between order and structure and value. Functionality and equality aren't the same. Radical feminism has failed. It has no future because it's founded on an attempt to repeal and restructure human nature. So-called empowerment has led to a lot of discontent, and the happiness meter for women has lights flashing on it like crazy. Thinking Christians should be differentiating themselves. You can be happy for the right for a woman to own property, for the right for a woman to vote, to enter into legal contracts, to have access to higher education, to inherit, to obtain legal guardianship of their own children, and to be held legally responsible in courts of law. That is wonderful. Absolutely glorious. That is a long way from the demonization of men and patriarchy, from the embrace of abortion and contraception and no-fault divorce, the rejection of sex roles, victimization, lesbianism, and anger addiction. which unfortunately is the underbelly of radical feminism in our culture. What a model, what a shock to our society to see wives, Christian women, who actually believe that their strength lies in adorning and respecting their husbands and maintaining a gentle and quiet spirit as their husband's helpmate. Powerful, powerful stuff. Father, can I stop there? Yeah.
If you want, we could take a break. So we're
Okay.
at the time for a break. Yeah.
Sure.
Take a 15-minute break, then come back for.
Yeah. Okay.
Hold your questions. Yeah, and if I can have, while you're on your break, if I said this, forgive me, I'm repeating myself. If anyone wants to help donate, there's a general donation box there to cover any expenses. We've had babysitters taking care of our children while we've had the presentation. So you're welcome to do that. If you want to donate $60,000 to help complete the patristic nectar thing, we can do that as well. If you want to donate a couple $1 million to us to build a church, please feel free to do that as well. Too.
Why not? Why not?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'll ask you a question.
Yeah, sure.
You know Father John Nativity?
I sure do, very well.
You sound a lot like him when you get you get not back very often. He's been for 30 years.
Do you guys feel hot? Cold? I always get cold too, so that's why
I love the man.
Okay.
I was at his concentration.
I know, because we run it.
There you have it. There you have it.
And it makes it a
I'll send you
small
the link so then you can watch it, right?
I'm originally from
I have no solving.
Okay.
Father John Howard.
How much you did?
Just go.
I figured you would.
Too much.
Small world. Small
Yeah,
world.
it's a small world after all. Anyway, when Father John's daughter was getting married, Father John, no, not Father John, Father James from here.
Sure, okay.
What's his last name?
Colt.
Oh, okay.
He was
Nice Greek
spiritual son of
Nice
Father
sort
John
of,
Nativity.
yeah, and he was, but he helped initiate
Oh, he did.
Father John's daughter's wedding.
You know Father Stephen?
Stephen.
Walensky?
Oh, yeah.
From Omaha.
How is Father Stephen? Is he still with us?
He's very, very
still with
much,
us?
yeah. He
He's
does,
gonna be at 80 years old.
probably older than that. And, but he,
I
his
haven't seen him
daughter
at clergy
finally,
functions for maybe 10 years.
he finally got married, or, his daughter finally got married. She's, I think, a couple of years older than I am. And a very nice young man who has become Orthodox. And so when Father Stephen does his service, he is right there to assist. Because I think Father Stephen is his place.
Wow. He's still serving.
But he's still serving.
He's the homily at our wedding.
He's a sub. He substitutes for other priests. But
Too much.
Landon,
Lance is there.
oh, he is. And I hope someday you give this presentation in Omaha, and then you can say hello to them.
Ah, that'd be nice.
It would.
That'd be nice. I have never been to Omaha. I've been passed through.
But I'm going to write to a couple of my girlfriends and tell her you gotta listen to this guy. But the other thing that I would tell people, that I always tell people when you're single and still looking, get to church. And yeah, we met at church. And when you go, when we go on vacation, we go to church. And when you visit family, or when you do make choices about where to go on vacation, do it somewhere where there's an Orthodox church. You know, if you've never been to Tucson, fly to Tucson, spend a weekend. There's two Orthodox churches there. If you've never been to Flagstaff, go to Flagstaff. There's an Orthodox church there. And, right, and they have a new building. They have a building, so finally. But go to church, meet their people. And, but also live, I'd say live in other parts of the country. One of my girlfriends is a nurse, and she has worked other places other than her hometown. She's always had a place where there's family or somebody or other Orthodox people that she already knows anyway. She had a bunch of roommates that were from that she knew in college, and so when it came time, she got a job saw a job opening in Seattle where she had two girlfriends that were living already there, and then she moved there and roomed with one of them for a while. Now she has her own place, but she still has that network, and she plans to move elsewhere eventually because she's met all the single people there. Okay, and so if you stay in your hometown and stay where your parents are, or stay there and don't meet anybody else, you're not going to meet anybody else. And we met, it's a good spot. It's a good spot, and sometimes I can go like this. But
Keeping you in line. She's keeping you in line with the stomach squats.
But yeah, get that advice. I guess I'll talk to you.
How that goes. I've tried. Well, I haven't said. Right now, that was his word. Originally, he didn't say he was on my email.
Thank you. Very well.
I know I can't.
They put me out of it, like, I'm thinking I'm gonna sit there waiting for the that happened. Next thing I know, surgery went great, yeah.
After doing my blood test, they came out, well, you don't need to have so yeah, and then but getting back up to that was hard. Everything Yes, you can get
All right.
I don't think he's going to do
Yeah, I don't think so either. Wednesday,
How are you looking?
you're so.
Sure. Whatever you make a decision that you want to do.
Well, I'll try to wait till after this. So that way you're off.
That would be really nice. Heather, I just want to invite you to
Which one?
Yes. Both, actually. Both. So my Jewish father said it's all.
Other places? Do you know what?
I do. I mean, I like Josiah Trenham personally, but I know a lot of people who know him personally through those
He's, you should see this too. You should see this. This is, my, are these two little girls. I'll show you. Three, and this is gonna be God, this is Olivia, she's 7, and Mary Catherine, she's 3. So,
I saw like a picture of Axius. How Axius?
other people's wives.
How old is he? Oh my God.
Yeah, he is. He's 6
I know,
foot
it's
1.
like I remember when he was little. But also since we're talking about like I'm not. I don't know if I can do that blindly, like, I don't know, I mean, just like thinking. How do you put so much trust into it? I feel that, I have to see some laughter, and I do preach for like girls every night.
Erase the conflict. Your name.
My father, I do have a list as well. I made a list of so I'll just show you the top.
Yes, yeah.
Little bit more to Christ. Okay, so welcome back, everyone. So I hope you enjoyed the break. So for those online, we're going to get started again. Father's just going to stretch his limbs. What else? So we have now, this is our last session, and at the end of the session we'll have Q&A. So we can ask questions from this particular portion from the good wife, but also if you have another question from the good husband, please feel free to ask that as well. And we should go until about 4:30. Does someone have the time now? Because I'm sitting here at 3:12. 3:12? 3:15. Okay, so 3:15. So maybe an hour talk, half an hour, or 45-minute talk and 45-minute questions. I think there's probably a lot more questions that we weren't able to get to in the first session, so we could do it that way. Thank you, Father.
Okay, I commend all of the ladies for receiving that lecture from me, for you. And before I pick a few minor themes from some of those other chapters, let me ask if there are questions about what I was just talking about, the wife as the helpmate.
So I do have an online question.
Okay, sure.
And this is from Sandra. Sandra mentions, she says, idolizing someone is a sin. How does being obedient to a husband, parentheses, through his foolishness or times of unrespectability, in your words, differ from that?
Oh, that's a great question.
So yeah.
Are you being recorded? Could they hear you just now?
I don't know. Possibly.
If idolatry is a sin, then how is it different from being respectful and submissive to a idiotic, foolish husband who's acting like a buffoon? It's absolutely, completely different. To be humble and submissive to an idiotic and foolish husband is not to enable him. Being submissive and obedient doesn't mean you encourage him in his foolishness. It doesn't mean that you pretend he's doing the right thing. It doesn't mean that you just ignore him. No, it's not what it means at all. It means that you never cease being a wife in dealing with him. If your husband is endangering the family, you're going to have to act. For instance, if he's being violent with the children, you're going to have to act. But you should act as a wife in your position with who you are, not assuming your position over him, or else you're just going to provoke it and make it worse. So all the church is suggesting is that you, like in those examples with priests and bishops that I gave you, it's another authority context in which there is a very sensitive relationship of hierarchy. But there's certainly dialogue, honesty, and communication. But it has to happen in a certain way. That is not just groveling. That is not just allowing a man to run all over the family. Not at all. But there's a way a wife can stop something as a wife, and there's a way a wife can stop something as a crazy woman. That's just going to make the husband even angrier. Other questions, please.
In this world where most of us as younger, this younger generation, we're led astray by the society. The ones that are trying to go against that current, how do we find that companion?
That's a fantastic question. The streams against us, as far as blowing in the opposite direction of virtue and what the church encourages. How, therefore, do you find the person that is there for you if you want to have a beautiful family? It's a fantastic question, and there's so much to encourage you with. First, the Lord is the one who fashions marriages. Remember, he was the one who made Adam and Eve and joined them together, yes? It wasn't just then. We say in the wedding service, he is the priest of mystical and pure marriage. Every marriage that we do that is beautiful and from God is the culmination of his providence. I'll tell you a couple examples in the scriptures. Are you all familiar with the Old Testament book of Tobit?
Some of you might not be, because in a lot of Bibles that are sold in the typical bookstores, it's a part of the Old Testament, what we Orthodox call the longer canon of the Old Testament, that was removed in the 19th century by the Protestant Church. So it's called by them the Apocrypha. We don't use that language. It's part of our Old Testament, and we read from it. It's an incredible book, the most romantic book in the entire Bible, hands down, hands down. It's the story of a man named Tobit, who has a beautiful son named Tobias. And the story is that of Tobias, they're Jews, they're in exile away from the Holy Land, and in the time of the Medes, and the son needs a wife. And so the narrative splits into two. And on one side you have Tobit and his son Tobias and the wife Anna, and they're concerned about their son, and he needs to get married, and the father's become sick and blind. It's a very crushing story. On the other hand, over here are some other believers, and they have a daughter named Sarah. Sarah has a really difficult problem because a demon named Asmodeus is in love with her and has murdered 7 successive husbands before they can consummate their wedding night. Can you imagine? Every time the father of Sarah gives the man into her, he joins their hands, they go into the bridal chamber, but before they're able to actually consummate their marriage, Asmodeus kills the man. And so Sarah's dad has to dig a grave. He's got the bones of 7 men on his property. You can imagine if you were her, you might think, it's not God's will for me to be married. Right? If you were listening to me earlier when I said, if things aren't working, you should maybe consider marriage is not for you. That doesn't apply to her. Because the story is, Archangel Raphael is sent by God in the guise of a man to take Tobias on a journey, leads him to Sarah, tells him the story just before he gets there. On the way there, he's telling them about this young girl he knows, who he thinks is a perfect match for him. And he's all of a sudden, as Tobias hears about her, he basically falls in love with her, never having ever met her. And then Raphael only reveals the truth about the murderers, like just before they show up. Oh, talk about a conflict of emotion. Tobias finds out, and Raphael, still appearing as a man, tells him, don't worry. You can beat this demon. This is what you do. You light some incense. After her father blesses you, and their families were distantly related. After the father blesses you, go into the bridal chamber with her, but don't go immediately to consummate your marriage. Light incense, kneel and pray together, and it will be so powerful, it will drive the demon away from you, and then you can consummate your marriage. So that's exactly what happens. They go, and just at the last moment, Tobias has cold feet, and he says to the archangel, who he doesn't think is an archangel, he doesn't find that out until the very last scene of the book. He says, I'm nervous. And the archangel said, don't worry. He says, this woman has been predestined for you from the beginning. It's an incredible window into how God arranges marriages. With that encouragement, he went. He got married, they prayed, they lit the incense, the demon was driven to the desert, never could come back. And the next morning, the father of Sarah, thinking he's got an 8th dead man, opens the door, and there they are sleeping together happily in peace, newly married. They end up spending 2 weeks celebrating their marriage. They end up going back and healing. The archangel tells Tobias and his new bride how to heal the blindness of his father Tobit. They get healed, and it's done. Incredible book. Go home and read it. Go home and read it. But the point is, there's someone there for you. That's one of the messages of the book. The Lord is the author of marriage from the beginning until the end. He brings couples together, maybe not the way we want or on the time scale that we want, but he knows what he's doing. He's fashioning persons to be together. This is a big encouragement. I'll tell you another text. Genesis chapter 28. Abraham, the patriarch, is trying to find a wife for his son Isaac. What does he do? He sends his chief servant, and he says to him, look, I don't want my son to marry any of these women where he was living, because they were all pagans. He's like, forget about it. I need you to go home to where I'm from, to my family, and I need you to find a wife for my son Isaac. The servant of Abraham, who's never named in the story, walks out of Abraham's presence, and immediately makes his prayer. He says, "Oh God of of the patriarch Abraham, please help me to find a wife for my Lord Isaac." And he gets very specific. He says, "When I come to such and such a place," which is a watering hole for all the camels in the caravan, "allow a woman to come and say to me, 'Please allow me to water you and your camels.'" Talk about like specific prayer. He shows up at the water hole. What do you know? He gets off. A young woman, Rebecca, walks up, notices him, puts her own water jug down because she's so full of hospitality. Instead of doing her business, she wants to help this visitor. And she walks up and she says, "Sir, please allow me to water your camels." He immediately prays, gets down, does a full prostration on the ground. She must have been freaked out. What's this guy doing? Does a full prostration on the ground and says, "I thank thee, Lord of heaven and earth, who has heard your servant's prayer and has found the wife for Rebecca." He goes to her house, finds out that it's perfect, it's all from God. Boom. So those are two scriptural examples. One, God is behind the arrangement of marriages. He's totally invested in this. It's a sacrament. It's a mystery of the church. And prayer about this will be heard by God. He respects it, and we should trust that he'll answer those prayers. And in the meantime, I'd have this counsel to you. This is something that was given to me. I really wanted to get married. I told you already I wanted to get married when I was 15. My dad laughed at me. When I was 18, I was dead serious. He wasn't laughing anymore. He wasn't laughing anymore. So a friend of mine gave me a book. And what it said, it's great advice. It said, think about what you want in a spouse. What are those character qualities? And write them down. So first it had an exercise at the end. Get out a piece of paper. I still have this paper. Write at the top, "My future spouse." And then write one character quality, one thing about that person that you want to marry. For each line, I wrote 33 things. There's 33 lines on my paper. And then here's the kicker. At the end, it says, now, go back, erase the top line, put your name, and be those things. And trust that God will provide your match. You want an honest spouse? You be honest. You want a hardworking spouse? You be hardworking. You want a person who takes care of themselves and is interested in the outdoors? Take care of yourself and be interested in the outdoors. Do those things. It was a tremendous piece of advice for me, and it really was helpful to me, extremely helpful. So be encouraged, be prayerful, and be the things you want in a spouse. Any other questions?
Okay, well, can I add to that?
Sure.
Actually, a prayer you gave me, maybe you can talk about the prayer of St. Gregory Palamas.
Forgive me. Went down the wrong way. Prayer I gave you of St. Gregory
Well,
Palamas?
you emailed it to me, I think it was.
Was it the prayer for one seeking a spouse?
Yeah.
Yeah. There's a beautiful prayer. It's actually from a Russian prayer book.
Oh, it's Russian prayer.
Yeah, it's a Russian prayer that's been translated into English.
Okay, forgive me.
No, it's okay. And it's specifically a prayer for someone who feels that they're ready to wed, but they don't know who. And it's a magnificent prayer. If you want it, get my email address from Father Andre, and I'll email it to you. It's a fantastic way to incorporate that desire into your daily prayers. You know what St. James says in the New Testament? You don't have because you do not ask.
Something I've always wanted to ask you, as I've been listening since you came out with the series. When you find out after marriage, after everything, really, okay, so I have, some issues here, trouble here. Maybe these are the roots, like basic example, a man needing to know his calling in life, right?
Sure.
Those types of things. And then later on realizing, okay, it seems like there is a pretty obvious warfare going on here. Disneyland culture taking over, right? Every Disney family is a broken image of what God intends the family to be. So realizing, okay, we're wounded people by the culture, society, and now we're into the church to be healed and learn and grow. What are bullet points of top things to actively get on the right track, and then also a way out? What are basic things you can do to be moving forward and not being
It's a
stuck in it,
fantastic
like, I
question.
did everything wrong.
Yeah, it's a fantastic question. Let me see if I can summarize it in brief for those who are in the webinar. Of course, when you hear a presentation like I'm giving about the good husband and the good wife, it's fine if you're 17 years old and you're not married and you're just thinking about what it would be to be a good husband or a good wife. What happens if you're already married? What happens if you're already married and divorced and remarried? We're all at different spots, right? Which means that the application of these truths are going to be applied differently. If you're in your third marriage and you just became an Orthodox Christian and you were a complete heathen, okay, you're going to have an application of this differently than if you're a 17-year-old thinking about it. What do you do if in the case where you're already married and you have many challenges and you're wondering about assimilating your life to the church's way? I would say chief on the list, patience and endurance to the end. Our stuff, in the best of marriages, couple grows up on this stuff. They've been eating it their whole life since they were 2, okay? They find this great spouse who's been raised the same way, they get married. They're barely gonna make it, my friend, I promise you. They're barely gonna make it. This is a crazy life. We are crazy people. The best of us in this room are mixed, right? We have an old man, we have a new man, every one of us. Thank God for the new man. Whatever you feed the most will dominate. But if you feed the new man and you try to starve the old man, which is what we should all be doing, you're still going to have a crisis of integrity your whole life. Salvation is complete for us in the future, not in the past. You know, the word salvation, the Greek verb for it, sozo, to save, is used in the New Testament in the past, in the present tense, and in the future tense. We've been saved. That takes place through repentance and baptism. We're being saved as we work out our salvation with fear and trembling, and we will be saved when our Savior returns in glory with our glorified souls, raises our dust-turned bodies, and fits us for eternal life in his kingdom. Of those three, do you know which is the most predominant use in the New Testament? The future. Contrary to the Protestants who always talk about, are you saved, as the past tense. There is a past tense. We have a baptism. But our predominant salvation is in the future. What that should tell us is that we've got to hold on to this wild ride, which we are, by patience and endurance. Hold on. You can make a lot of progress, and no matter what mess you are, if you have a generous dose of forgiveness. If you're willing to forgive each other and cover over each other's, that's what love does, right? Love covers a multitude of sins. Throw the blanket wide, just like you want God to throw it wide on your sins, right? Throw it wide on your spouse's sins. Endure each other, because best of cases, still very tough. Still very tough. I'm up here, talking to you about marriage. I sometimes wake up, I wonder how I'm still alive. The struggles and trials that I've gone through as a husband, as a father. I should be very clear. It's my wife's struggles that she's going through as far as marriage goes. The woman is like a saint. Thank you very much. The woman is okay. She's a saint, okay? But the troubles with kids, even in the best cases, it's really tough. So don't be discouraged, because despair is the ultimate arsenal, the ultimate weapon in the arsenal of the devil. If we give in to discouragement, we're done. We're done. St. John Chrysostom says depression or discouragement is the biggest nuclear bomb of the devil, because if you believe it for a moment, you won't believe you can change, which means you won't even try, which means you're absolutely going nowhere. So just endure, have some hopefulness, and take it one step at a time. Remember the tortoise and the hare, friends. Fantastic image of a good life. If you want to win, just try to make a little progress every single day. Just a little progress. There's a story, great story. It's in the collection of the Desert Fathers called the Evergetinos, which is the books of the teachings of the Desert Fathers, our best collection of spiritual principles of life. And it's about depression. The text is about depression. And the story is that this father has asked his son to clear this field that he just bought.
and the field is covered with briars and thorns everywhere. And he drives his son to the field. He says, son, this is what I want you to clear. The son looks out at the field and he goes, I can't, there's weeds everywhere. It's like a 100-acre field. He's like, so he lays down and goes to sleep, which is exactly what we do when we're overwhelmed, right? You're overwhelmed, you don't feel like you can make any progress. You have a glass of wine and you just go to bed. That's the human move, right? Unfortunately for this guy, he woke up the next morning and he saw the same thing, so he just drank and went to bed again. His father comes after like a month, thinking that the field will now be perfect and probably planted. And he comes and he recognizes his son has done nothing. And he says to his son, what is this? And his son said, Pops, I can't do this. It's too hard. His dad said, look, son, you're getting way overwhelmed here for nothing. He goes, look at the ground. And he looks down at the ground. He goes, do you see that? He goes, what? He goes, look where you lay every day. By your laying on this spot, you have completely cleared it of briars and thorns. He goes, all you have to do is move to a different spot. So true. That's all you have to do. Just do a little bit every day. And if you skip a day, don't cry about it. Just start the next day. Just do a little bit every day with that kind of intentionality. You can really make a lot of progress. You can make a lot of progress. Other questions before we go on? Please.
You kind of mentioned, and correct me if I'm wrong, but like for men to be ready for marriage, you focus more on like them working.
Yeah.
What about women? I mean, how do women
with regards to work
prepare themselves for marriage?
It's a fantastic question, and it's a nice segue into what I'm hoping to cover here too. So today it's very difficult because men and women are being treated equally with regards to education. And that's nice with regards to allowing women to access education. But it's not nice in the sense that there are all of the educational opportunities are basically focused in the public square, so that the classic domestic arts, which used to be a major component of women's college education, don't exist anymore. So, matter of fact, in most universities no longer even have a major called home economics. Home economics used to be a serious major. And believe me, to manage a house, if you're going to do it well as a woman, and you are going to be actually in charge of your house, to do it well, you have to have competence in finance. You're going to have competence in nutrition. You're going to have confidence in cleaning and taking care of things, making things last. You're going to have to know how to deal with finances as far as purchasing and overseeing things. That just doesn't happen. And if you really want a good house, and if you want your husband to like absolutely adore you, you got to know how to cook. I know you're going to get offended by this, these young ladies. You got to listen to me. You have to believe me. Whether he says he cares or not, he's lying. Knowing how to cook is the secret to the happiness of your man. I'm promising you this. Our tradition says this. You look at the Orthodox Church. How many things in the church have to do with food? Everywhere. I tell my ladies at my church, I said, look, I'm a converted heretic. Okay, that's what I am. I was raised a Presbyterian. We were pretty messed up. I discovered the Orthodox Church. I loved our worship. I loved our theology, our spiritual life. It was like I had stumbled into a castle I never knew existed. I found this big box of gold, overflowing jewels. And when I get to the bottom of one box, I see another door. I go in that room and there's another one. It's been like that for me for 25 years. One after the other, after the other, after the other. I told my lady, but even if all that was not true, I would have converted just for the food. Absolutely no question. Because not only is it absolutely delicious, connected to such significant things, but it's so obviously made in love and as a part of the community. Hospitality just drips, it pulls you in, makes you part of something much bigger. It's absolutely incredible. It's absolutely incredible. And the church can't even exist without cooking. We don't buy prosra at the bakery, right? You have to cook it. And you have to make it good. We can't go to Ralph's. You have Ralph's here? Safeway. You don't go to Safeway and buy Coliva. I'm sorry. This is not how it works. It's not even possible. So cooking is of the essence, and learning to do that, you're not going to learn that unless you go into the culinary academy, right, which is a thing itself. You're not going to basically learn that. So I would say you have to take a double track as a young woman who wants to be married, a wife and a mother. Consider your other talents also as subsidiary, not as a replacement. Don't make being a wife, a home worker, and a mother, don't make it second, third, or fourth in your vocation, because that's not what it is. So any job that you have, make sure it's going to be able to be combined with your calling to be a wife, which means you've got to be there for your husband. If you want him to produce, he's going to need you. And if you're working outside the home as hard as he is, who's going to take care of the two of you? You're not going to be there to take care of him. So I know there are plenty of women who work full-time jobs. It's very, very challenging to do, especially when you have kids. If your kids are gone, you might be, and your husband's not needy, you might be able to do it. Otherwise, I would say focus on having a job that can collaborate well with being a wife and a homemaker and a mother. And there are lots of jobs like that. Like there's lots of, you can be even a doctor these days. If you get into a fraternity of doctors that want to work less, I mean, the normal doctor's life is nuts. It's absolutely nuts. It's like a priest's life. Too many hours, too far away from home. But I know there's a female physician in my church who's part of a team of doctors, all who are mothers. And so they're only working like 20 to 25 hours a week. Put them together, they're working 70, 75 hours a week, but they're able to be moms too. Nurses, you can get good part-time nursing jobs. So I would just say, whatever you do something like that. Even teachers now can do co-ops. I have a teacher in my parish who co-teaches a second grade class. She does that because her kids are at home, right? So she's still using her talents, but she hasn't abandoned the primary glorious position for the wife, which is to rule the house and to administer the house. Does that help? Yeah. Any other questions before we continue?
In order to do that, you have to simplify. You have to simplify your home.
Yep.
That's the key thing.
Yep.
To simplify.
Absolutely. As responsibilities mount, extraneous things have to go bye-bye. Absolutely. Okay.
You mentioned the home economics, like the woman also knowing like financing and being responsible in that way, but then you say like the man's the leader and the provider. So, how do you come together when it comes to money?
Oh, that's a wonderful question. That's a wonderful question.
Sorry, you were just trying to move forward, but
No, it's so important. And as I mentioned, until 3 years ago, it was the number one cited reason for divorce. So having a common agreement about the most important things with regards to financial management, absolutely essential. When I do pre-marriage counseling, and I think this is standard for pre-marriage counselors in general, when you do pre-marriage counseling, you take the couple through the creation of a budget. A lot of people these days, because of the credit card industry and big banks who make fortunes off of people's mismanagement of finances, I get probably, and you probably do too, I probably get 10 credit card applications unsolicited in my mailbox every week. Every week. And they just go in the trash, one after the other, one after the other. If you have a credit score over 750, you are going to get these things forever. Why? They just love you so much, they want to give you money? No. They want you to have credit cards so that you can give into your passion for acquisition and buy more than you can afford, and then have to pay them their atrocious interest so that they can get rich. And you can be a slave. Debt in the scriptures is called slavery. It is called slavery. You do not want to be in debt. There are a few reasons it might be justified in our society. One of those is when you invest in something that is an appreciating asset, not a depreciating asset. In my state, real estate applies to them. No one in California, unless they are filthy rich, are going to be able to buy a house without taking a loan and getting into debt. But generally speaking, it's no problem because California real estate has outperformed almost every other investment for 100 years, at least. So you're actually investing and making money off the investment. I would say that in general is a principle young couples, when they start out, should have. No debt for depreciating assets, like new cars. When you get a new car and you drive it off the shop, you lose several $1,000s in 15 minutes that you're never going to recover. 15 minutes. Really dangerous. Much better to drive simple and save up the money and buy the car outright. Having an agreement to have a budget, having an agreement not to spend more than you make, that's basic Christianity. Giving God a portion of your resources as first fruits before you pay any other bills, basic Christianity all over the Bible. So establishing those principles, any basic premarital workbook that you would go through is going to have a chapter on finances, and it's going to make you think through those things that I just mentioned. That has nothing to, those are principles, that has nothing to do with who does what in your family. That is something you guys are going to have to discuss. The couple's going to have to make up a decision. Who's going to pay the bills? Make sure that there's a lot of open communication. Everybody knows. You should also have spending agreements, meaning that you do not spend money above a certain level without mutual consultation. It's one of the most common reasons for divorce is a major purchase without consulting the spouse. Because, especially if it involves debt, it's a big deal. Those financial principles, key, absolutely key.
You're trying to have a plan already before anything comes up, like an outline of, like you said, not to spend over a certain amount. Or...
Absolutely. And to have a budget. You know, to have a budget means that you are documenting every expense that you have. That's what a budget includes. It reflects the income that you expect and the expenses, and then you can match them up. Having a budget is the only way that you know what disposable income you have. Disposable income is income that you have left each month after you've paid your tithe and you've paid your bills, things that are essential. Some of you are going to have no disposable income, which means you're not going to buy anything. Some of you are going to have tons of disposable income, and then you have to decide, what are we going to do with this disposable income? Are we going to save it? Are we going to give it to the church? Are we going to spend it on an acquisition of things? But having that kind of serious approach to money is simply following Jesus. Just so you know, even though in general, parishioners do not like priests talking about money. And believe me, we priests do not like talking about money because we get so beat up about it. And some priests care about getting beat up more than others. I don't really care. Jesus talked about money constantly. Constantly. Every gospel, multiple times. Okay? The talents, the rich man who loses everything. Tomorrow's gospel lesson. I mean, yeah, it's constantly. The rich man who had all the real estate and Jesus asked him to sell it all and he wouldn't. He went away sad. Where your treasure is, your heart will be. Right in the middle of the Sermon on the Mount. It's everywhere. So you have to apply your faith to the aspect of money and recognize how you use your money is a reflection of your spiritual priorities, what you really care about. You can take anyone's. I know you guys don't use checkbooks anymore, but we used to use checkbooks. We used to use checkbooks. I used to tell people, look, if I have your checkbook, I know what kind of Christian you are. Simple as that. Just give me your checkbook. Let me see how you spend your money, and I can discern exactly what matters in your life. Just remember that. God sees it even if you don't have a checkbook. He can read the digital accounts on Bank of America.
I mean, men and women have different interests and different needs.
Yep.
Just because, what sex they are. So, I mean, the man being the leader, does that have to do with, does he still have the ultimate say if you can't really understand each other's interests?
That's a great question. That's a great question. What about if you have a lot of different financial concerns? Who has the ultimate say? In general, ultimate says are only necessary if you don't have a great relationship or even a decent one. Because ultimate says only need to exist when you're blocked and you can't get through it. That's really when the hard edge of a husband's headship shows itself. I'm thinking of my own life. I'm not really sure I've ever done that with my kids all the time. But with my wife, I don't think I've ever like said, look, we can't decide, so I'm deciding. I could do that, and I'm sure that she would probably follow me, but I've never had to do that. I really haven't. Because I know she needs different stuff. She knows I need different stuff. If she had a concern about me spending something, she'd say. If I had a concern about her spending something, I'd say. And that's why I emphasize very open communication. You've got to have very open communication and make sure that you're not acting like a single person if you're married. If you're married, you're no longer a single person. There's no mine and yours in marriage. No, 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 no. When couples go through pre-marriage counseling, I insist they combine their account. There's no my account and your account stuff. And I take care of my money and he takes care of his money. There's no his money, my money stuff. There's our money that we spend.
You'd be amazed at how that changes later in life. I had the most original experience with my parents because they certainly, you know, they went through the Depression or whatever, and they saved a lot of money. But it was so interesting when they came to town here in Arizona one time, and they were interested in getting a house. They wanted to move from New York City. They looked through some model homes and they said, oh yeah, that's great. Okay. My father says, I'll put up half my money, and you put up the other half your money. They were in their 70s by then. And it only got worse with time.
Wow.
They each opened up little bank accounts that the other one wouldn't know about. And when we finally realized,
It's true.
when we finally realized they're getting up in years, and this is more common than you might think, we brought them to an attorney to put together a trust, and then the secrets came out. The attorney was just flabbergasted as each one confessed to a different bank account. And by the time they were all consolidated, we had spent thousands in attorney fees because it's by the hour. And said, thank you very much, Mom and Dad. You know, it's whatever. And you also had mentioned, you know, you got to show respect towards your parents. Well, maturity level in life goes up as you reach your 20s, 30s, 40s, and then it plateaus and then it starts to drop. And by the time you're 80 or 90, my wife and I had 3 kids. They were 88 at the time of their death, 97, and 86. And quite honestly, it's like dealing with a 5 or a 10-year-old. You know, and nobody had interest in their money. It was more interest in take care of yourself, but it became such a struggle. But it was quite the experience. So I say it as a word of advice to those with elderly parents. It can change.
She's 84. She's 84. Anyway, yes, you know, one of the retreats I give a lot is not marriage and family like we're doing this time. It's called On Aging. I call it White Hairs and White Hearts. Because gerontology in general is becoming a larger and larger issue as our culture is aging. And there's a lot of writings in the Fathers about getting old. As a matter of fact, one of the great works, classic works in Latin from the great statesman Cicero, it's called in Latin De Senectute, which means on old age. And yeah, it's incredible. And he wrote it as an old man about his life. And he talks about the great things about being old and the horrible things about being old. It's funny because you tapped into one of the horrible things he said. He said that one of the great things about getting old is that you have wisdom that only age can produce. He said it's like a man who's a captain of a ship and he sits at the wheel. And just because he's not moving a lot and going up and down the mast and stuff, you wouldn't think he's not doing things, right? So you may be slowing down in your old age, but that doesn't mean you're not driving the ship. You're still driving the ship. He said, but the vice, he said, of old age is avarice. He says, money becomes wild when you get old. I've never forgot reading that, thinking to myself, I got to make sure I keep my eye on that. Make sure I keep my eye on that.
And yet there was no lack of love between them.
Thank God.
They couldn't do with each other, they couldn't deal with each other, nor could they deal without each other. The moment they were separated for hospitalization or whatever, the other was in tears.
All right. Can I go on? How are we?
I'd like to add
Please.
one
Sure.
little thing. So
Sure.
when you quoted St. Margaret, that was just the wisest thing that you crystallized for me. I came from obviously from a different culture. And the things that you mentioned in terms of wives and really they are the better part of us. They do improve us. And whether or not it's obvious for feminists or other younger ladies here, right? They do work their wily ways making us better people. I noticed that in terms of how my mother did things, right? It's like my father's strong-willed, typical hierarchical Chinese family. But everyone in the family really knew who was the puppet master.
Yeah.
It was the mother, right? We stepped on the wrong toes. Yeah, the father gave you the Medusa eyes that turned you into stone. But it was the mother who was really working things and making things work. Yeah. And as you know, in my married life, I noticed, yeah, we have fun problems too, right? That over the years, she has also been my puppet master, right? And I guess the kids also know that. Because like, when we first started dating, oh yeah, Mike, get away from that game. Now it's like, yeah, let's go take the girls out. Okay, yeah, let me save the game. Okay, we're off, right? So the role of the mother or the wife just cannot be so understated, and the way you just crystallized it, and how it like just transcends even our own religion onto other cultures where it also happens. It is just, I thought that was just a very interesting phenomena.
Yeah, that we are depending on.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
One more.
You talked about the difference between submission and tacit approval of sin or aiding
Sure.
and abetting of sin.
This is a similar question to that one that we received from the webinar, which is what's the difference between submission and sinning or giving a tacit? Here's a fairly good way to distinguish it. When the scriptures ask wives to obey their husbands and submit, they don't mean to ever do anything that their husband asks if it's sinful. So here's a clear distinction. If obeying the husband would lead the wife into a sin, absolutely do not do it. Practically speaking, one of the ways that this happens most is in female-male relations, is males love to use women, impregnate them, and then have the women get abortions. Non-stop, constantly happening everywhere. And in that case, a woman should say, over my dead body. Sorry, it's not going to happen. Now that's a grotesque, extreme example. And in closer to home for us, we men also, we have, sometimes we just get crazy. Our sexual desires are so disordered. We want our women to perform unnatural acts. And a woman should not cooperate with that. Absolutely not cooperate. There are things that are, marriage provides the natural God-ordained context for conjugal union and for sexuality. It's not a license to sin. If something is perverted outside of marriage, it is perverted in marriage. Marriage is not a legal blanket that just makes things okay at all. Sexuality is an important topic. It's all over the scriptures. It's all over the church teaching. Unnatural acts, which are so common in our society, should not be accommodated by a wife. Stealing, cheating. Wives shouldn't, anything like that, that's a clear violation of a commandment. But there's one way to refuse, and there's another, right? You can refuse quietly without saying, oh, you're such a scumbag, right? Or saying, oh, you're so disgusting. How could you do that, husband? Right? Don't insult him. If he's weak and he's disobedient to the word, as St. Peter says,
Still be quiet, be humble, be gentle, but don't comply. Don't comply. However, flip it. What if it's just a matter of you not being happy about it? It may not be sinful or other, you just don't like it. That's when your obedience is really valuable. If your husband wants dinner when he comes home, but it's at this time that you normally, I don't know, talk to your sister on the phone who lives in New York and is 3 hours ahead, make the dinner. Make the dinner.
An example I have with an aunt, whose husband, my aunt would go to church every Sunday, and that's body and blood, and was very important to her. But one day her husband said, "You're spending too much time at church, I want you to stay home with me on Sunday." And so she thought about it a little while, and she said, "Well, I'm supposed to be obedient to my husband, but if I do that, I want you to know now it's between you and God." And he thought about it a little while, and he goes, "No, you can go to church."
I take that back. I take that back. That's right. You got two husbands. Remember that. You always, if you're married to a man on the earth and you're a Christian, you got two husbands. You got one there and one here, and he has an opinion. Anything else? How are we doing on time for the rest of my?
So it's 4 o'clock now.
Okay.
So about 30 minutes.
Okay. All right. So let me ask you, since you are all engaged, I'm so happy. No, nobody's sleeping. I'm feeling really great about that. We have 30 minutes before we tie it up. So, what would you like me to focus on? The good wife as a faithful friend, the good wife as the heart of the family, or the good wife as the lover and the healing drug? Healing drug. All right, now that the men have spoken, they can be quiet. Oh, that is terrible. That is so terrible. Oh my gosh. Classic. But the women, you speak. Heart of the family. I knew you were going to say that. Heart of the family. Okay, so we have 30 minutes. Since I have to break the tie, it's like the vice president in Congress, right? There's a split vote. So, okay, so let's start with the heart. The wife is the heart of the family. And then, Father, will you give me a mark when it's 15 minutes? And if I feel like it, I'll switch over to the healing drugs. So we've talked about the wife as the helpmate. We've talked a little bit about the wife as the homemaker, as the manager of the house. And by the way, if you want to know details about that, I suggest you read the 31st chapter of the Proverbs about the good wife who fears God and all the things that she does, managing her home, managing real estate, clothing her kids, feeding her husband. Incredible chapter. Incredible chapter. Now we're turning to the good wife as the heart of the family. And the first thing I want to suggest is that strong Christian women who want to be strong, should do their best to imitate the example of the most pure Theotokos, of the Mother of God. The quality, in St. Peter's words, of a gentle and quiet spirit which is able to bend the hard will of a rebellious man and alter male dispositions is revealed chiefly in her character, in her own heart. Pania has this. The Virgin never pined after masculinity. She was never bothered that she wasn't an apostle out preaching in the public square or serving the liturgy. She was never bothered by that. She did not reject her feminine power in order to embrace an externalized masculine model of being. Instead, she modeled for the whole church the qualities of the feminine perfectly. She became the bride of God, the mother of the faithful, the ultimate homemaker, not making a domestic residence holy only, but filling the whole house of God. Just think of her as that in the church, the house of God, over which she's the manager. She's the homemaker. When we come into the temple of God, we see her prominently in the Eastern apse. She presides over all Christians as a model and example of life. Her life is the template of asceticism for our monks and nuns and for our married peoples, which is why she's not only honored and her life intimately studied in monasteries, but in homes. She's the heart of the Christian family, and good wives who imitate her life become also like her. They try to become little Theotoki. By the way, that's the language of Saint Simeon the New Theologian. After extolling the Theotokos and her qualities, he says, we are all required by God to become little Theotoki, small mother of gods, like her. She didn't stomp her feet and pout that she wasn't an apostle, like the apostles, since she was the heart. She didn't claim oppression and injustice or level accusations of prejudice against the apostles and bishops and priests of the church because she wasn't allowed to serve the Holy Eucharist or lead the divine liturgy. Instead, she honored the apostles as the successors of her son's priesthood on the earth, and she was everything to them as the heart of the apostolic community. She was the spiritual mother of the apostles. She exercised her care by love. This is why everyone was so devoted to her. And that's why we find her in the middle of the gathered early Christian community. She taught everyone how to be true Christians, and that is in fact what a wife and mother does in her home. She shows us how to develop the interior life of holiness. And remember, brothers and sisters, Jesus taught us love for God, following him, being a Christian is a matter of this. The exterior is only valuable inasmuch as it reflects this. He took every one of the commandments of the Old Testament and he pressed it in here. You have heard that it was said, you shall not commit murder. But I say to you, everyone who is angry with his brother in his heart is in danger of the fire of hell. He took all the commandments and he pressed them into the heart. This is why the cultivation of the interior life, what she is all about, what the mother is all about in the family, is so precious. The mother presides over the home's interior life, how to exalt prayer as the supreme creation, the most noble task. She teaches us that. How to place love for God and for people above everything else. The mom teaches that. This is also connected to cooking. Cooking as an expression of love, to nourish. Our Lady's heart is mentioned in the scriptures. She was heart-centered. She was an interior person. She studied her heart and she purified it. She speaks about her own life. She says, my spirit rejoices in God, my Savior. And the scriptures say that beholding the miracle of the incarnation and the adoration of the shepherds and the praise of the angels, she didn't run off and announce what she had seen, but she, quote, treasured up all these things, pondering them in her heart. She was a woman who lived out of her heart. She teaches us that the goal in the Christian life is to become all heart. This same phrase, pondering in her heart, is repeated later in the gospel after the events surrounding the visit of the Holy Family to Jerusalem when Jesus was 12 years old. After finding Christ, the young man, after he had been missing for several days, the scriptures read, and he went down with them and came to Nazareth, and he continued in subjection to them, and his mother treasured all these things in her heart. Here's the same phrase to describe the Virgin Mary, but it's 12 years later than the first time it appeared. First, it's when she's watching the miracle of his birth, and then 12 years later, having raised him all those years, he disappears in the temple, she finds him, and again the phrase is repeated. She's still living and processing everything from the inside. The treasuring up in the heart, the cultivation of the inner person is what we are trying to accomplish. It's what enables us to bear good fruit. And without it, we're rotten fruit. Listen to Jesus' teaching. The good man, out of the good treasure of his heart, brings forth what is good. The evil man, out of the evil treasure of his heart, brings forth what is evil, for the mouth speaks out of what fills the heart. Here you see the proper orientation. The inner life determines the outer life, and the cultivation of the heart is the only way to love God with our whole hearts, right? Which is the chief commandment. It's the key to escaping empty formalism, bogus external religion, which St. Paul says is a form of religion without power. The Holy Virgin is the great heart of the church, and good wives who are seeking to imitate her example become the great hearts of their own families. The spirit of the Holy Virgin is the feminine spirit of the refined life, the cultivation of the inner person, engaged in a war to love God on the inside and to defeat interior evil. St. Thalassios in the Philokalia, he says, woman symbolizes the soul engaged in ascetic practice. Through union with it, the intellect begets its virtues. Can you imagine? St. Thalassios is saying the very name woman symbolizes interior struggle for virtue. So the good wife cultivates her heart, and she also cultivates the heart of the family. She calls the family back to a center that rests in love. She expresses her God-given, outrageously beautiful feminine spirit by cultivating her heart, and from that position, she helps her husband have a heart, because we have a harder time having hearts than women. Some of that is simply of the fact that we live usually in a very rough exterior world. You know, when you get hit all the time, things build up. They're called calluses. When you are constantly engaged in difficult, ugly public things, you get calluses. Wives help those calluses to go away. Wives help men descend back into their inner life. Good women therefore cultivate holiness in each family member. She's the one who notices the first appearances of selfishness in children. This is why I have never, in almost 25 years as a priest, ever had a father bring a child to me for their first confession. Always the mom. Why? Because the dad didn't even notice. He just didn't notice. Now, when the wife told him, he goes, oh yeah, she's got to do something about that. She's the one who notices these things. I remember once when my 7-year-old, Olivia, she's almost 8 now, when she was 5, I was having, there was a little interaction between her and my wife. Little Olivia had done something that for the first time my wife thought was serious enough for her to go to confession. And she worked with Olivia. She talked her through why what she had done wasn't good, why she must not do it again. She helped her to say sorry. She taught her how to apologize. And then she worked through her embarrassment to get her to come to me and tell me about it. And I remember holding my little princess on my knee, and she whispered her confession in my ear. I remember it. She whispered her, and I asked her a few questions, and I said, are you sorry about that, sweetie? And did you say sorry to mommy and to your sister about that? And I gave her a kiss and let her go. And I thought to myself, that's a good wife. That is what I was hoping was going to happen. But the good wife wasn't done. When she came back, when Olivia came back to the kitchen, she asked her, she goes, did he give you absolution? Right? So she was teaching her that she needed to confess, but also she needed to make sure that she went to see a priest and got absolution on her head. That's how it goes away. It was a very, very beautiful practice. So she came back, and I had to get up from my couch. Wasn't so happy about that, but and go out to my little chapel and put on my epitryhelion and read absolution for my little daughter. She learned something very important thanks to my wife. So the good wife is the cultivator of holiness, and she's also, I would call her the dignifier. She's the dignifier. She exercises a lot of powerful censorship in the house. Over music, over television, over conversation, over manners, and over dress. That a man simply isn't interested in doing and probably doesn't notice. It's, in fact, last night, my wife had a task for me that I didn't know she had. My son, one of my sons, I think I mentioned it a little bit earlier, has discovered the feminine sex, and she got a phone call from someone at his school, just letting her know, making sure that she knew that he was a thing with a girl. Basically, they were considered to be a thing. She was very surprised to find out that they were a thing. And she asked about it at home, and she asked the woman who called, who was a friend of hers, who worked in the administration there at the school. And she asked her, well, what does that mean? Well, all the other kids said that they were always talking together, and evidently in study hall they were holding hands. Who would have thought? Who would have thought? And so he came home, and she immediately grabbed me, and she said, you're going to have this conversation with him right now. I'm like, okay, let's do it. I sat down, she brought him in, and I said, son, I said, who's the girl? I said, I don't know anything about her. Tell me about her. Oh, he showed me some pictures, and we talked. I said, that's great. I said, you know that I'm like world famous for going around telling people you don't date till you're ready to marry, right? I'm your dad. I'm your dad, man. I said, are you like ready? Are you ready? I said, are you giving me notice that you're moving out? You got the money? You got the apartment? You got the car? Should I take this as your notification? And he's looking at me, no, you're misunderstanding. I said, I guess I must be misunderstanding. What did you mean to communicate? Because a woman called from school today. She said, you're a thing. You got this girl that you were seeing holding hands, blah, 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 blah. And he's like, gonna fix that, Pops. I said, is that called like backpedaling? I said, that's a good idea. I said, you got to backpedal. He goes, that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to call her tonight. I'm going to backpedal. I said, bravo, bravo. And then I told him this. I said, look, son. I said, you got to watch your heart. Don't run ahead of yourself. Take it easy. Enjoy yourself. Take it easy. I said, and no PDA, public displays of affection. And he's like, done. It's a great kid. Anyway, I think I'm done. I thought I did a pretty good job. He went away. She looked at me. She was like, and I said to her, I said, what? What did I do wrong? And she said, you said no PDA. I said, well, no doubt. What do you want me to say? She goes, let me tell you how he's going to understand that. He's going to mean, don't let people see you holding her hand. And I said, you're right. And that was, in fact, exactly how he saw it. And so we had to have the second conversation. Anyway, needless to say, none of that would have happened without the woman who was watching, listening, examining every movement. Really, I mean, it can go too far, like picking up their phone all the time and looking at it. Leave it alone, or don't give them one. But really, that's what a wife can do. She exercises a very powerful censorship that the kids need. Sometimes they hate her for it, but wow, do they come back later and love her for it. Absolutely devoted to her.
So you're at the halfway mark.
The halfway mark. She's also, I would call her the compassion builder. She's the one who connects hearts in the family. She's the one who reminds everyone in the family of important things like birthdays, name days, anniversaries. Where would we be without that? She's also the reconciler. She's the one who makes sure that opinions get moderated, that children stay friends and develop their friendships. I can't tell you, if I had $1 for every time I heard my wife say to one or other of my kids, stop fighting, you are each other's best friends, I'd be rich. I'd be rich. Constantly nourishing friendship between the kids, helping them to do the hard work of building friendships in the house. Incredible. She's the one teaching them to say those incredible words, please forgive me, or I love you, or thank you. My littlest, who's 3, has been having some problems with please and thank you. I'm blamed for this because I have spoiled her. I confess. The girl is an angel in the flesh. There's no question about that. She is an angel in the flesh, and she is my biggest fan and my biggest consolation. I come home, she sits on my lap and washes me clean every day. My wife says the result of that is that she's become spoiled and that she won't say please and thank you. So I told my wife, I said, her name is Mary.
Of course.
And anyway, so
my wife told me that I have to fix it. And so I said, no, sweetie, that's why I have you. That's why I have it. She accepted it. She accepted it. I didn't want to have to tell my daughter to do all that stuff. And, and she did. So a couple days later, I come home and I give my little one, I make her cereal in the morning. I'm the breakfast guy in the morning. I made her breakfast and I put it there. And then she looks at me and she goes, please and thank you. Please and thank you. And I said, bravo, bravo. You know, she had a little, stuck together there. This is what the wife can do. She's the one who watches all of these things, nurses them, reconciles the kids. This is how a wife can hold a whole family together. And it's also how a wife can blow a whole family apart. If the wife refuses to be the heart, or if she allows herself to get a bad heart and bitter, there's nothing worse than bitterness and resentment at the center of a family. Nothing will solve it except humility and repentance. Very, very powerful. She drips. Her atmosphere, her opinions, her feel sets the tones in the home. Turns a building into a house, a true home, by having a good heart. So in the last 10 minutes, let me turn to and make the husbands happy. And talk a little bit about the wife as a potent healing drug, okay? I just love saying that. I really do. It's so profound. It's so profound, and it's a quote from the Golden Mouth himself. Remember that I've told you the pulse of our culture is androgyny, the negation of the uniqueness and the beauty of the male sex and the female sex. In fact, though this is the case, that's not something that the church accepts. We boldly affirm rather that God has made human beings, male and female, as sacred complements, as completions of the whole. Sexual differentiation is a part of our natures, not extraneous to it. And the expression of this sex role differentiation is manifested very clearly at the time that man fell. It was not only the blessings of earthly marriage and sexual intercourse and the procreation of children as we know it, but the various allowances that God made for man's weakness that were brought into being at the fall of man. Following the fall, the relationship between men and women was deeply affected. St. Ephraim the Syrian, he says that Eve was guilty herself of seeking dominion over Adam. She hastened to eat before her husband, that she might become head over her head, that she might become the one to give the command to that one by whom she was to be commanded, and that she might be older in divinity than the one who was older than her in humanity. Remember, she believed the lie that if she ate the apple, she would become as God. Following the fall, men began to abusively lord their authority and power over women. And as a gracious countermeasure to the physical strength of men, the Lord infused women with a tremendous sexual power over men. This power of allurement, together with the power of procreation, served to protect women from being cast off and abused by men, says St. John Chrysostom. Feminine beauty became for man an immense power and snare. And in God's mercy, this feminine power served to further the unity of husbands and wives. By granting to man the stronger sexual desire, God bound man to the woman. This is why the scripture reads, for this cause a man shall leave his father and mother and cleave to his wife, not vice versa. It's the man who takes the initiative, who seeks the wife, and then leaves everything for her, cleaving to her intensely. The stronger desire in the man was God's design in order by the tyranny of his erotic love to bend down the stronger and superior man and subject him to the woman. God honored the man with rule, and he armed the woman with the power of sexual allurement. Sexually speaking, this means, according to the church fathers, that the woman is able to practice chastity more easily than the man because she has, quote, no such strong flame disturbing her, unquote, in the words of Chrysostom. In our unisex culture that has lost its grounding in a Christian worldview, many men and women do not understand this divine design and the origins of marriage and human sexuality. Take, for example, the point of feminine allurement. It's been my experience that men, often not knowing the teaching about this gift of feminine allurement, expect their wives to have
the same kind of disposition and appetites as they do. I would call that the masculinization of the feminine modesty. And so they get encouraged in this thought that by the example of lots of, unfortunately, immoral, forward, and licentious women in our own society who are usurping the male role. In fact, the plague of pornography has become so big that it is larger financially than all of Hollywood. The billions of dollars that go into the porn industry are larger product than all legitimate movies that Hollywood produces annually. That's how bad it is. And if so, unfortunately, this temptation that men have in a unisex society is furthered by watching women act like men, by watching fake, plastic, designer women act in ways that aren't natural, further distorting the male image of what is appropriate and what's good. The good wife should have instead a beautiful feminine mystique and recognize that this is part of her beauty and what sets her apart from her husband and what attaches him to her. Peter, as we've already read, says that a wife's power lies in her quietness, in her modesty, in her gentility. A wife's power is in her ability to respond to her husband's disobedience, not with masculine force or the violence of a raised voice and threats, which is almost universally ineffective for a man, but rather with a purity, a love, an endurance, and a quiet that humbles the man and changes his life. Responding to masculinity with masculinity, it's a lose-lose. Responding with the feminine mystique can produce a miracle without a word. Men who misuse the fact that they're stronger vessels than women physically, that misuse their power, they become abusers. They destroy what God has given them to cherish. And in the same way, women who misuse their mystique over men become abusers in their own right. A man can use his power wrong, and a woman can use her feminine allurement wrong. And both can hurt the other by a misuse. The Proverbs of Solomon, for instance, warn vociferously against the dangers of the adulterous woman. Proverbs provides the most extensive teaching on the dangers and consequences of fornication and adultery in the entire scriptures, particularly in chapters 5 through 7. And the antithesis to the adulterous woman in chapters 5 through 7 of Proverbs is the virtuous woman of Proverbs 31. So you see presented the loose woman at the beginning and the godly woman who's the boast of her husband, whom he can't live without, at the end. The adulterous woman have lips that drip honey. Her speech is smoother than oil. She uses words of flattery and suggestion to lure her prey, and she doesn't practice discretion of speech. She doesn't ponder the path of life. She's a shallow person who doesn't think and converse about serious matters in life. She catches men with her eyelids. She hunts them like prey. By the way, each of these is a verse from Proverbs. She dresses immodestly. She's boisterous and rebellious. Her feet, quote, do not remain at home, which is a very important relationship. She makes sexual advances. She seizes him and kisses him. She takes the role of the man. She becomes the initiator. She has a brazen face. She entices. She flatters. And King Solomon is clear. The man who responds at all to such a woman is a complete fool. He follows her like an ox going to the slaughter. An arrow will pierce his liver. It will cost him his life. Many are her victims, he says. Numerous are all her slain. Her house is the way to hell. Whoa. Whoa. Note that the scriptures teach it's not just women who suffer sexual abuse. It's not just women. Women can suffer rape, sexual assault, etc. from men. And men can be sexually abused by licentious women. The Holy Fathers developed the scriptural theme of male abuse by the misuse of female allurement a lot. Many fathers wrote treatises on the importance of feminine modesty. St. Cyprian of Carthage, for instance, the great African father, wrote an entire book called On Feminine Modesty. These are his words. He says, continence and chastity consist not only in the purity of the body, but in dignity, as well as in the modesty of dress and adornment. No one seeing a virgin should doubt whether she is one. No one on seeing a virgin should doubt whether she is one. Let her innocence manifest itself equally in all things, and her dress not dishonor the sanctity of her body. Let chaste and modest virgins shun the attire of the unchaste, the clothing of the immodest, the insignia of brothels. Oh, gosh. This is our life, brothers and sisters. We have a culture in which it's hard to even find modest clothes in the shops. You have to look at different shops all the way just to find some decent clothes. And so a lot of our young girls are pure on the inside, but they wear the clothing of harlots. If you picked up, I've shocked so many youth groups saying this, but it's absolutely true. If you would take a typical young person in high school, young girl in high school, and you took her and you went back 16 centuries and you dropped her in any of the cities of the Roman Empire, you know what she would be thought to be? A prostitute. They would consider her a prostitute. She's exposing half of her legs, maybe her complete arms, nothing on her head. They say, oh, we know exactly what that is. By the way, and this is not to justify the filthy actions of Muslim refugee men, which are filthy. I've traveled all over the Middle East and I've seen it firsthand, how filthy it is. But when Muslim men come to Germany and in public, they see girls out in public with little tiny shorts and wearing hardly anything, exposing their private parts, they have one thought. She's a whore, and she should be touched and molested. It's wrong. I wish they'd all go home or throw them in jail. But culturally, that's what it is. That's how bad it is today. Saint Clement of Alexandria, one of our greatest teachers ever. He was head of the catechetical school in Alexandria. He said this about modesty to the women. He says, your arms are beautiful and your thighs are majestic for your husband. That's the point. Feminine beauty, this is one of the gifts of marriage in conjugal union. It's not to be spread around everywhere. And St. Cyprian says, a man who drinks, a man who lusts, drinks poison. He says, but do you think the one who drinks poison is the only one who's punished? What about the one who mixes it? If you mix the hemlock and then the men drink it, if you mix it by immodesty and then the man drinks it, both are going to suffer. Both are going to be held accountable by God. Feminine allurement is something that should be very carefully shepherded by the wife for her husband's happiness, not for the general public. When I was younger, when I was going to college, my brother went to Berkeley, and I went to visit him once. I was a freshman in college. And I drove up there because a man had just been in the news. He was called the Sock Man. You know why he was called the Sock Man? Did any of you remember the Sock Man? He was called the Sock Man. You know why? Because that's all he wore to class. One sock over his privates. And Berkeley decided that was appropriate wear. Yeah. I wanted to go see the Sock Man. I drove up to see my brother, and I got in late, like 2 o'clock in the morning. I was so exhausted. I found the parking place, which is a near miracle in Berkeley, and I went up to his dorm room, and I woke him up. I knew the room number. I woke him up. I said, "Gotta go to the bathroom. Where's the bathroom?" He goes, "Down the hall, down the hall." So I went down the hall. I went into the bathroom. I'm taking care of business. Next thing I know, I hear a woman's voice, and she's singing in the bathroom. And I look over, and there is a woman at the sink. Yeah, and I'm like, wow, I'm so embarrassed. It's 2 o'clock in the morning. I've been driving for like 7 hours. I think to myself, I went into the women's bathroom. I better get out of here before this really gets ugly. So I finished. I went to sleep. I got up the next morning, and I told him I want to take a shower. He goes, good. I said bathroom. I went in there. I go in, I pull the shower curtain, and I'm showering. Next thing I know, I hear someone showering next to me. And I hear a woman's voice. I'm like, this is impossible. I looked this time. Well, I wasn't ever in the wrong bathroom. The bathrooms were co-ed. They just went to the bathroom together. Who would have guessed? Welcome to Berkeley. Welcome to our crazy life. We can't obtain our standards of what's dignified from the world. They don't have good standards. The world doesn't have good standards. We're supposed to be the salt and light. Model that kind of beautiful, modest, feminine allurement to the world. Not like that. Not like that. How do we Christianize it? How do we use that kind of power to good? A woman's real strength. How do we do that? Chrysostom teaches that the embraces of a wife are to a husband a harbor in the storm of his life. He says the wife is a sweet ointment. He calls her a miron, which is the word we use for chrism. A wife is a miron, and noble and lawful marital intercourse is hymned by him. He says it can be and is designed by God as a mystery of love, possessing tremendous unitive power. And from this unitive power, new life springs. By faithfully coming together with her husband, the good wife regulates sexual passion, and her sexual embrace serves the husband as a pharmakon megiston, a great drug. Pious Christian wives have to remember their husband's spiritual war and not simply offer themselves to their husbands when they themselves desire sexual intercourse. This is one of the ways to be a humble wife. The good wife knows how to care for her children and to make sure that they are nourished even when she herself is not hungry or does not desire to eat, right? If a mom sees that her children are in need and hungry, she makes food even if she doesn't eat a thing. In the same way, if a wife recognizes that her husband needs her sexually because of his own crazy life, even if she herself is not desirous of her husband, is sensitive to him. This is the motivation of love. She knows that in this way, loving carnal union with her husband is essential for his own victory over lust and temptation. And she should make sure that when she comes together with her husband, she does it. She makes sure that the husband and wife have regular union and that it's loving, not made to feel like the husband is just a slave. Oh, that again. That's not the way to do it. Not to make him feel like he's some sort of lust monster. Of course, when men today sometimes expect their wives to satisfy their every sexual desire, such a desire should not be rewarded. And there certainly are ways that women can help their husbands, in Lent especially, when men have a real hard time disciplining themselves sexually. The wives can help them, but they should help them remembering their husbands sensitively, meaning not making fun of them and their desire, being sensitive to them. And remember that sexual fasting is something that is unlike any other kind of fasting. All other kind of fastings are things you do yourself. Whether your wife wants to not eat meat versus you, that's her decision. But sexual fasting, St. Paul says, is by mutual decision, because the consequences of it affect both parties. The wife might not want to sleep with her husband, but that doesn't mean that the husband thinks it's possible, right? So that has to be very sensitively addressed by the couple with tolerance, some sort of compromise, if there's not an agreement of mind, not an insistence that could in fact lead the husband to a fault. Why don't I stop and see if there's any questions about that? The wife as the heart, or the wife as the pharmakon megiston? Please.
You know, here in Arizona, it's very hot, and you have a lot of stress. And one of the only activities, at least that my family does, I know a lot of other families, is go swimming during the summer. And the bathing suits that are out these days, and do you have any advice about that?
The question is, you live in a desert.
boiling. Swimming is a natural pastime here. So many of the swimsuits are just terrible, terribly immoral, and hardly there, almost not even there. What do you do? What do you do? I feel your pain. I'm a fourth generation SoCal boy. The beach is like my dream. Whenever I can get there, I go there. And yet it is also really debauched, terribly, terribly debauched. I would say that we should enjoy the beach. It has so much to offer. We should enjoy the swimming pool, but we should not do it as worldlings, which means that we should have decency in how we dress, which means you're going to have to, like in other things, you're going to have to, these days, work pretty hard to find reasonably modest swimsuits. There are a few swimsuit designers that have succeeded, in my opinion, to do this pretty well. I have collaborated in the past with the Mormons in my area of Southern California in fashion shows. This is one of the things that we collaborated in. Matter of fact, the way I even got turned on to them is they convinced the local Nordstroms where we are to actually have a fashion show for people of faith. It was incredible, incredible. This is Nordstrom. This is some, and they had full-blown, great, beautiful. We're not about ugly. Modesty does not mean ugly. We are committed to beauty and modesty. And this fashion show definitely demonstrated it. And it was dresses, pant outfits, all sorts of different clothing that were very beautiful and very modest, including bathing suits that were. Can you find them everywhere? Absolutely not. Really tough. Really tough. When we have Soyo or Goya, young adult, young high school events at the beach, our girls usually wear a one-piece bathing suit and they wear a t-shirt. They wear a t-shirt. It's helpful too because we usually play football and we run around, and it saves them a lot of embarrassment and a lot of hassle. But I feel sorry. I really do feel sorry. Someone sent me a picture of the beach on the East Coast. I think it was Atlantic City, 100 years ago. Blew me away. Absolutely blew me away. First of all, there were people everywhere on the beach. I mean, talk about using the beach. There were people everywhere, but they had clothes on. They had clothes on. I think if we presented that model today, people would say, "Oh, I could never, ever, I would die. I'd be so hot," or whatever. They just had a different standard of discretion, a different standard of modesty. And we should at least push back some way. Some way. My wife has an interesting bathing suit. I don't know what you call it. But it's a one piece, but it has kind of a, I don't know, it's like a little skirt. Yeah, it's like a little skirt. It's called a mail-out or a something-out, or I don't know. It has a name. Yeah, it's like a little skirt down here. But it's pretty.
Swim dress. Swim dress.
It's like a swim dress, I guess you call it. Yeah. Anyway, it's nice. It's nice, and I wouldn't feel bad. I don't feel bad with her in it. I mean, it's not the kind of thing that I'd want the whole world still to see her in, right? But if she's going to the beach and with the kids, that's the kind of thing I think she should wear.
Do you also ask?
Yoga pants, though, nuts. Yoga pants, going to the gym in yoga pants. Christians should have no business doing that. It's just like paint. They're just painting on. I mean, just so you know, I read an article. I guess this was maybe 2002, 2003. There was a study done of women and men, visual interactions between women and men, in which the scientists who were studying it were gauging the men's visual contact with women. The whole purpose of the study was to see the effects on men's visual side of women depending upon whether the woman was wearing a dress or pants.
unbelievable article. The study showed that when a woman first came into a man's visual line of sight and she was wearing a dress, guess what the first thing was that he looked at? Her face. When a woman came into a man's visual sight wearing pants, guess what the first thing he looked at was? Her crotch. Okay, that is how it is. So if you want guys looking at your crotch, wear yoga pants, and you're gonna get it. If you want men to respect you and look at your face, cover yourself up. Cover yourself up, look decent. Have some honesty.
When you have these events with Goya and Soyo, do you also ask the young men to dress modestly as well?
The question is, what about men? And asking men to dress modestly. And I would say yes and no. So there is such a thing as male modesty. Absolutely true. So guys going around with girls with their shirts off, no. But guys taking their shirts off to go swimming, I don't have any problem with that. So the standard of male and female modesty are not the same. Men and women are not the same. And men do not wound women by taking their shirts off the same way that women wound men by wearing yoga pants. The male modesty is a big deal, but it's nowhere near the big deal that female modesty is, which is why in all of the scriptures, all of the references to modesty are to females.
What about in professionalism? I'm studying to be a teacher, so is it something that I should get used to wearing long skirts all the time, which I'm okay with, but it's just easier.
Oh, you're asking a great question.
It's easier for me to just put on like this slacks and.
That's another fantastic issue, and that is the important connection between vocation and dress. Hello. Okay. When I first was ordained, after 1 year wearing a cassock, I wasn't sure how I was going to like it. Remember, I was a beach guy. I grew up here. I'm like, black in Southern California, a dress. These things are heavy. They are really heavy. And I don't like sweating all the time. Get used to it. And if you're going to be a priest, you're going to sweat all the time. You're going to go through shirts faster than you can buy them. But after 1 year, I wrote a poem. I'm no poet, but I wrote a poem. I had some sudden inspiration called In Hymn of the Cassock. And I just basically praised it because it changed my life. You put a cassock on, and it affects how you deal with people when you meet them in public. I can't tell you how many people, matter of fact, it works vice versa. So for instance, I had a lot of work to do on the plane this morning. I took my cassock off and I put it in my bag because if I want to get anything done on a plane with my cassock on, dream on. Everyone's going to tell me their sob story. Oh, my aunt's dying. Oh, my wife's not talking to me, Father. What can I do? Anyway, usually I'm up for that. I was not up for that this morning. So I took it off. I put it in my bag. As soon as I got off the plane, I put it back on. And I had my work done. But the connection between uniform and function, really important. And don't underestimate what it does. I'm constantly telling my high schoolers, look, you want to succeed. They all want to go to college, get good grades. I'm like, you want to get good grades? Start dressing right. They're like, what? I'm like, yeah, you want to take seriously your academics? Dress serious. Dress like you got something to do. Dress like it's a job. Don't sit around here in your socks and your shorts and your sweatpants and say, I'm going to be a great academic. You want to be a great academic? Take it seriously. You get your clothes on, decent professional clothes, slacks, at least a collared shirt, and you go to a desk and you study there and you take it seriously. That's how it's done. And that applies to lots of things, right? Policemen, nurses, doctors, they have uniforms that facilitate their function. And priests, to have a cassock calls a priest to be a priest wherever he is. It helps him. It puts a tremendous barrier between yourself and temptation. Just imagine, and by the way, this is not rare. Imagine if a loose woman wanted to hurt the church or hurt the priesthood. It's one thing to approach a man who's in normal civilian clothes. You're going to approach a priest dressed like this? You're going to have some real gumption. right? That's going to take a lot to do that. The cassock is a tremendous protectant, yeah, and a tremendous deterrent. So I would say absolutely, you should think about your own vocation and what you want to convey.
Another question off of that. In the world of feminism and how girls like to expose their bodies because it gets them attention.
Sure.
I'm going to be a high school math teacher, so how would I help these girls see that they have to dress the way they want to be treated? Because that's not how they see it.
That's great. I think you're doing a good job. I do. You're beautiful. You're dressing very beautifully. I'll tell you something. My family's all from England. We've been here a long time, but that's our roots. And we're still very connected there. My father was always there. My grandfather was a Rhodes Scholar at Oxford. I went to school there in England. The saddest thing for me, I lived there for half a year back in 2003, and I had 7 kids at the time. And they all went to English schools for that semester. The degradation in dress in the UK is atrocious. No one cares about anything. They wear ripped everything, shirt, piercings all over their bodies. I mean, it's horrible. It's just horrible. Move to one country to the east, go to France, night and day. Night and day. I've always told my girls, look, sweet, I said, please dress like the French women, not like the English women. The English women have lost all hope, I think. I just think that the country's hopeless. Maybe after Brexit, they won't be so hopeless. I don't know. I don't know. But in France, a French woman, and I know this is a stereotype, but I'm telling you, I think it's absolutely true. I think it's a stereotype for a reason. A French woman and an English woman could have the same outfit. Let's say they have a pair of jeans and a shirt. The French woman is going to find a way to put a little ribbon around her neck. She's going to have something on her shoe. She's going to make sure that the shirt is over her belly. Okay, the English woman is going to let her belly stick out, no matter. She might be really overweight, 100 pounds, but she's going to let her belly down. She's going to have a bunch of rings, like with teeth hanging off them or something. It's that crazy. It's that crazy. There's a way to be beautiful and a lady, and thankfully the French still have it. They're fighting really hard. That country is fighting really hard for marriage right now. No one would have guessed it. President Hollande tried to force same-sex marriage down their parliament. 2 million people turned out onto the streets of the Champs-Élysées. Larger turnout of protest against same-sex marriage than any place in the world. Secular France. Yeah, not so secular. Not so secular.
So, secular France, right? Deeply Catholic nation. You mentioned collaboration with Mormons. I also have a Presbyterian background. What is unique about the Orthodox of marriage, family, and that?
I would say in general, if I had to contrast it to what you might see in a American Christian ethos, that what would strike American Christians most about us and our family relations is the corporate nature of everything. For us, family is not nuclear. In America, when we think family, we think primary nuclear. And myself, my spouse, and our kids. When an Orthodox thinks family, they think church. They think church, they think kumbari, they think cousins, they think we have a much fuller, kind of thicker inclusion with regards to who exactly is family. And that comes, of course, from our theology. I mean, we actually think the 6 ecumenical councils canons actually say that in baptism, the sponsor forms a bond with the baptized that is deeper than blood. I mean, it's actually our deep theological conviction that your cum relations are actually real, even more real than what's under your skin between biological family. And therefore, we have this sense of extended family connected through Christ and the church. I think that would be the primary way our relations would maybe less individualized. And also we would endure, I also think our sense of suffering, our positive view of suffering,
is such that we endure a lot more than an American would. So, and there's, every pastor has 1,000 examples. I'm thinking right now about a woman in my parish whose husband has been cheating on her for 3 years, and she knows it, and she has endured it. And I told her she didn't have to. She could dump him, she could throw him out. I'd support her 100%. I feel like ripping his head off. I almost did. But she's so virtuous, and she has a positive view of that God's in charge of her life, that she's been able to endure and keep loving him. I think that view of suffering is also something that's really big. I'll tell you, we divorce so fast in America. Big problem arises, forget about it. Rip it to pieces and try again. And whereas Orthodox might say, oh gosh, get out. But they don't mean divorce. They just mean get out. Maybe a year later, it might get fixed. I'll give you I know couples that were separated for 10 years. 10 years, and then got back together. It's just not that unusual. It's not that unusual. We have a more kind of a slower formation and a slower dissolution process, and I think that's very, very Orthodox, and it's a very good thing. I tell a lot of couples when they're on the verge of divorce, I'm like, look, consider legal separation. Because a lot of times the wife just wants protection. If that's a common scenario. She just wants protection. Legal separation gives you everything that divorce gets you, but keeps the marriage intact. Gives you financial separation, space separation if you need it, but you can also, it gives you time to fix it. We even have a service for revitalizing marriage when it's been fractured, even for reconstituting church marriage when there's been a divorce, a civil divorce. So I think that the corporateness of it, and also our willingness to endure and to hope. Obviously, we think marriage is a sacrament, and since it involved the church, it's not. If you just go to a judge, it's really easy to dissolve. But if you go through the process of the church and your parents, mortgaged the house for your wedding in the first place, you don't want to throw it away so quick. Do we have time for any more questions?
It's 4:55 now, so maybe we should end here.
For sure. May I just say a closing remark?
Please.
So we talked about lots of sensitive things. If I said anything wrong, then you need to forgive me. I'm asking forgiveness right now if I said anything wrong. And also, remember too, I'm just talking about platitudes. So I know all of you are in different places, some very happy relationships, some of you in very sad relationships. I'm not speaking to you in that condition. I'm just speaking to you as people hearing principles from our church that are edifying, but please don't think I know your situation or I'm trying to tell you to do something. That's not what I'm doing. That you do with your own pastor or your own family. So please don't be mad at me if I stepped on any toes. It was unintentional. It was unintentional. And I know I make a lot of mistakes, but I've got to talk about these things anyway because they're so important. Really important stuff. And so I take a risk to mention that. Please forgive me if I overspoke in any way. Thank you very much for your attention and for not sleeping on me. Really owe you for that. I owe you for that. If you come to Southern California and are looking for a place to pray, please come to St. Andrew Church. Just an hour east of LA in Riverside. We have a beautiful church. You'll love the liturgy there. You're absolutely welcome. I consider you all new cousins, and you're welcome at the church. Thank you, especially Father Andre, for having me.
Thank you, Father. So at this time, we will begin Great Vespers shortly. We have 5 minutes till the service begins. If we'd be so kind as to take your chair to the fellowship area, that would be much appreciated. And thank you again, Father Josiah, for your beautiful words. And we can, let's give a round of applause to Father Josiah. And also, lastly, once again, if you didn't pick up a copy of the offer for the audio files, they're here. And it's a very simple link. It's patristicnectar.org/temple, and you can pick that up very easily to make a purchase. Thank you.